Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something wonderfully weird on sleep histories. The kind of cozy, slightly gross rabbit hole that'll have you questioning how humanity ever made it this far. We're slipping through time to explore what it was really like to use the bathroom in a medieval castle. And oh yes, the downright scandalous truth about how, or if, people back then actually bathed. Picture this. Towering gray stone walls loom above you, cold enough to bite your fingertips. Torches flicker along damp corridors, leaving long shadows that seem to whisper secrets. Somewhere nearby, a lute plinks a sour note. The air is a swirling cocktail of roasted meats, sweat, wet hay, and well, things that once lived inside other people. And you, dear time traveler, are right in the thick of it. Because tonight you're going to wander through drafty garderobes, those delightful medieval toilet closets that dangle over castle walls. You're going to peek into communal bathhouses where the water's, let's call it, well seasoned. You'll meet lords too fancy to scrub behind their ears, and peasants who might just smell better than their masters. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive the first day. Not with your modern nose, your delicate little preference for daily showers, or your squeamish horror at the idea of rats treating a moat like their personal swimming pool/latrine. Charming, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps me keep unearthing all these delightfully questionable chapters of human history. And hey, I'd love to know where and when you're listening from. Drop your city and the current time down in the comments so we can see just how far this little campfire of ours reaches. Alright, now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying there, the blankets tucked just so, your pillow cradling your head like the tender palm of someone who knows all your secrets and still decided to let you stay over. Your breathing has begun to slow, your eyelids grow heavy, but your mind, oh, it's bright and alert, scampering around like a little medieval mouse in the larder. Perfect, because I want to take you by the hand, or maybe just by the imagination, and wander back, way back, into a world that's strange, stony, slightly musty, and startlingly alive. Close your eyes. No, really, trust me. Imagine it. You stand at the base of a towering fortress, so tall it seems to poke holes right into the low, smudgy clouds. The walls are rough-hewn gray stone, stacked by hands long dead, bearing faint scars of old battles. Narrow arrow slits blink like tired eyes along the ramparts. A stiff little banner flaps overhead, its colors dulled by countless rains. You crane your neck, and a fine mist kisses your face, tasting faintly of moss, iron, and distant wood smoke. At your feet, the ground is a patchwork of churned mud and straw, soaked through with rain and, quite frankly, other things you'd rather not guess at. Little puddles catch the dim sky. Your boots, or your borrowed mental approximation of boots, squelch unpleasantly. Nearby, a lean dog noses through a pile of refuse, snatches up something unspeakable, and lopes off, pleased with its disgusting prize. You take a slow, curious step forward, because there's a strange thrill to being here, isn't there? The past is right up against your skin. Everything feels raw, unfiltered. A cart creaks by, its wooden wheels biting into the mud, laden with barrels that smell sharply of sour ale. The driver, cloaked in wool, gives you a passing nod that might mean, good day, or simply don't get in my way. His beard is a tangled testament to his busy life. No time for trimming, when your main concern is not starving, come winter. Somewhere to your left, you hear laughter, bright, brittle, echoing against the stone. You turn your head just in time to see a pair of stable boys chasing each other, brandishing what appeared to be horse brushes like dueling swords. Their cheeks are ruddy from cold and mischief. Above them, on a jutting wooden balcony, a woman leans over to pour out a basin of cloudy water, sending it splashing perilously close to the boys. They shriek and scatter, slipping in the mud. Ah, medieval street life, a place of constant motion and the ever-present risk of being doused by someone else's leftover bathwater or worse. Your nose wrinkles reflexively, and you realize, with a little horror, that even this crisp air carries a melange of odors: damp wool, unwashed bodies, hay, manure, roasted onions, and a certain ripe undercurrent of people living very close together with very few drains. But somehow, it's not entirely unpleasant. It's honest, unvarnished. Everyone smells like work and the earth. There's a peculiar charm in knowing that every scent tells a story of yesterday's meal, or last week's festival, or the sheep that someone snuck through the courtyard at dawn. As you wander forward, you approach the grand gates of the castle proper. They stand half open, guarded by two men in quilted gambesons, with spears that look almost too large for their wiry frames. One is picking his teeth with a straw. The other rubs at his shoulder like he's got a perpetual cramp. They glance at you with mild disinterest. Security was often more about intimidation than actual interception. With a small nod, you slip through. Inside, the courtyard opens up. Here, the ground is slightly more solid underfoot, tamped down by generations of boots, hooves, and wagon wheels. Pigeons fuss around the edges, hoping for crumbs. A couple of chickens scratch industriously by the smithy. Over to one side, a boy is stacking logs, his breath visible in little white puffs. Somewhere above, on an inner balcony, two young ladies giggle behind their hands. Their dresses are rich with color, deep green and warm saffron, though if you looked closer, you might see a few carefully mended seams. Even nobles had to patch things up when cloth was so costly. Your eyes drift upward again. This close, you can see that the mighty castle walls aren't pristine. They're stained by centuries of rain, bird droppings, smoke. Small plants have found daring purchase in tiny cracks. It's a living place, aged, slightly shabby in the corners, but still impressive enough to make your heart give a respectful little thump. And that's when it hits you. Not metaphorically, literally. A drop, cold, right on your cheek. Then another, splashing your brow. You flinch and look up, half expecting rain, but no. Someone above just dumped out a pot. Was it only water? You can hope, because the medieval castle was not exactly equipped with modern plumbing. Anything liquid, washing water, chamber pot contents, half-finished ale, spoiled milk, often took a swift trip from the nearest window to the ground below. A convenient disposal system, as long as you didn't happen to be strolling underneath. Congratulations, you've survived your first small hazard of medieval daily life. Truly, you're adapting quickly. Still, you decide to step under an archway for safety. The arch leads into a dim corridor, its walls so thick you could practically nap on the window ledge. The stones are cool under your fingertips, rough like the skin of an old tree. You take a breath here in the relative quiet and feel a hush settle over you. Outside was bustling, noisy, uncontainable. In here, voices drop to murmurs. Boots soften their tread. It's like entering a library, but one that also happens to smell faintly of tallow smoke and damp fur cloaks. For a moment, you just stand there, soaking it in. The play of torchlight on stone, the soft flutter of tapestries that keep the worst of the drafts at bay. You hear distant voices, maybe servants discussing tonight's feast. The echo makes it hard to tell where anyone is. It's a little eerie. It's also deeply calming in that curious way ancient places often are. You can almost feel the heartbeat of the castle beneath your feet, steady and old, unconcerned with your modern anxieties. Your mind drifts to the people who've walked these same halls, hands trailing along the same cold stone. Knights in mail that clinked like dozens of tiny bells, pages darting past with messages clenched tight, ladies in gowns that swept up dust as easily as admiration. Even the rats, industrious as ever, scuttling about their endless scavenger hunts. You can almost hear them, can't you? The murmur of old intrigues, the quick gasp of a lover slipping into the wrong corridor, the bark of a steward keeping the household ledger balanced with all the skill of a juggler. This place has been alive for centuries, breathing in feasts and famines, weddings and plagues. And here you are, an invisible visitor from the future, drifting through its arteries like a curious ghost. You step out the other side of the corridor, into another courtyard, smaller and more private. There's a fountain here, dry for the season, and some simple wooden benches dusted with straw. A woman sits on one, mending a tear in her husband's tunic. She hums under her breath, a tuneless little sound that nonetheless fills the chilly space with a touch of warmth. You give her a soft, imaginary nod, though of course she can't see you. This is your story tonight, not hers. Then you notice a narrow stairway winding up along the inner wall, beckoning you upward. You climb it slowly, your hand on the rope railing for balance. The steps are uneven, worn into shallow bowls by countless feet. Halfway up you pause to look back over the courtyard. Tiles, chimneys, fluttering laundry. It feels oddly intimate, like peeking into someone's backyard from a rooftop cafe. Except instead of avocado toast and lattes, there's a woman gutting fish by a bucket, and two toddlers chasing a goose that absolutely does not want to be chased. By the time you reach the top, you find yourself on a covered walkway, open to the chilly breeze. From here, you can see beyond the castle walls. The fields roll out like rumpled green blankets, dotted with sheep and stubborn little farmsteads. A thin road twists away toward the distant hills, where forest waits like a dark promise. Somewhere out there, other castles keep their lonely vigils, and other people live lives filled with their own small dramas, none of which involve smartphones or delivery apps. You lean against the parapet, breathing in air that smells of damp stone and chimney soot. It's bracing, sharp enough to make your lungs tingle. As you stand there, letting your mind drift, a lazy crow hops along the battlements. It regards you with a bright, beady eye, tilts its head as if to say, "What are you doing here?" before flapping off to investigate more pressing crow business. You smile to yourself, because somehow, even surrounded by centuries of rough living, dubious hygiene, and stone that might crumble if you so much as sneezed too hard, there's a gentle kind of magic here. A world stripped down to simpler stakes: warmth, food, shelter, the hope of surviving the winter, and maybe, just maybe, a moment to lean against a wall and watch a crow try to look important. So stay with me. Keep breathing slow, easy. We've barely started our wander through this medieval marvel. Soon, we'll follow the stone corridors deeper, discover corners most visitors never think about, and of course come nose to nose with the surprising truths of castle toilets and the bathing rituals, or lack thereof, that still haunt the myths of the Middle Ages. But for now, let your shoulders drop. Feel how your rib cage rises and falls, as steady as the centuries beneath you. The castle is old, but tonight, it's also yours. And together, we'll keep exploring. You start to wander along the covered walkway, your fingertips brushing the rough wooden railing, still cool from the morning frost. Below, the courtyard life hums on. Someone dumps out a bucket of potato peels. A stable hand tugs at a mule that stubbornly refuses to budge. Two older women argue over whose turn it is to fetch more kindling. Their voices bounce up to you in scattered fragments, little shards of an ancient domestic comedy. The walkway eventually leads to a heavier wooden door, studded with iron nails. You hesitate just a second, then push it open. A thick scent greets you instantly. It's an enveloping swirl of burning tallow candles, damp stone, traces of herbs, someone tucked in a wall crevice to ward off miasmas, and underneath it all, the undeniable tang of bodies living in close company. Step inside with me. The hall is vast, soaring beams overhead, crisscross like the ribs of some slumbering beast. Banners hang down in faded reds and greens, their once proud crests now just ghostly outlines. A few have holes where moths feasted undisturbed for decades. Great wooden tables run the length of the room, each scarred with knife cuts and dark rings from countless spilled tankards. If you run your hand across the surface, you'd feel sticky patches of old ale, faint grains of salt, maybe even a splinter or two just waiting to surprise you. There's a fireplace at the far end, big enough to roast an ox, sometimes literally. Right now, it's a little more modest, with thick logs crackling and sending up embers that dance lazily before settling back into the hearth. A spit slowly turns, though tonight it only bears a couple of plump hens, their skins popping and sizzling, letting out drips of fat that hiss when they hit the coals. The smell of it twines through the hall like an eager hand, tugging you closer. Look around. This is the bustling heart of the castle. Servants move in pairs, carrying baskets of bread or flagons of wine. A scribe sits hunched at a side table, scratching out accounts with a goose quill, occasionally pausing to blow on the ink or rub his cramped fingers. Near the center, two men arm wrestle, their sleeves rolled up, faces flushed with effort and drink. A little crowd gathers, laughing, slapping shoulders, exchanging coins on the sly. Every so often, someone slams a fist on the table, and the whole assembly jumps. Over by the long wall benches, you spot a group of children, young pages mostly, waiting to be called into service. They're playing a quiet game with stones, huddled close for warmth. One boy suddenly lets out a yelp of triumph, clutching his prize, only to be shushed by a stern-looking woman whose cap is askew from hurrying about all day. Even discipline, it seems, has an air of weary affection here. As you meander through this living tapestry, your feet tread on rushes scattered thick across the floor. These reeds are meant to absorb spills, dropped bones, bits of grease, though they also trap fleas and the occasional uninvited rodent. You catch a faint whiff of lavender where someone was thoughtful enough to mix herbs into the rushes, trying valiantly to keep the more offensive odors at bay. But it's a losing battle, really. The mixture of life's many aromas is as unavoidable here as the draft that curls around your ankles. Passing a cluster of gossiping kitchen maids, you catch snippets of scandal. Apparently, Sir Godfrey was seen slipping into Lady Alice's solar last night, long after even the bats had tucked in. One maid fans herself dramatically at the thought, another rolls her eyes and mutters that Sir Godfrey's breath smells like spoiled cider anyway. You have to grin. Medieval people didn't have social media, but gossip was its own vibrant, analog network, swift, ruthless, and oddly community building. A little further on, you reach an open doorway framed by heavy tapestries. Here, the atmosphere shifts. Voices drop. Footsteps soften. This is the threshold of more private chambers. the Lord's hall, perhaps even his personal quarters beyond. A pair of guards stands here, less bored than the ones at the outer gate. Their hands rest on sword pommels, thumbs idly tracing the metal. They eye you with the polite suspicion due anyone who ventures too close to power. We won't push our luck by barging into bedchambers tonight. Instead, let's slip down a narrower passage just off to the side. The ceiling here lowers abruptly, the torchlight dims, and you feel the cool, damp breath of stone closing in. These are service passages, arteries of the castle that carried cooks, scullions, errand boys bustling about, often unnoticed by grand visitors. Your shoes whisper over worn flagstones, slick in places where dripping walls weep little mineral tears. Cobwebs tremble as you pass, disturbed by currents of air, or maybe by the soft tread of something small and skittering that wisely avoids your torch's glow. A fat spider hangs in a quiet corner, legs tucked tight, utterly unimpressed by human business. Rounding a corner, you come upon a small arch that leads into what looks like a pantry. Shelves line the walls, stacked with clay pots, rough sacks tied with string, bunches of dried herbs hanging from beams overhead. The air is thick with rosemary, thyme, garlic, and the deeper, almost sweet scent of onions aging in their papery skins. You catch sight of a wheel of cheese, crusted in something white and fuzzy. You can't decide if it's inviting or alarming, likely a bit of both. From somewhere deeper in the gloom comes the faint clink of bottles. You edge closer, only to see a stooped cellarer carefully inspecting a cask, tapping its side with a practiced ear. His breath makes little white puffs as he mutters, no doubt calculating how many jugs remain before he has to petition the steward for more. Wine was the lifeblood of many a medieval table, and a clever cellarer knew exactly how to stretch the barrels without earning the Lord's displeasure. When he glances up, he gives you a faint nod, another ghost of the past acknowledging your invisible visit. Then he turns back to his task, content in his private kingdom of dust and liquid riches. You retreat, making your way down yet another twisting passage. This one opens out abruptly into a small chamber with a single arrow slit, admitting a blade of cold blue daylight. Here stands a guard off duty, armor half stripped, methodically cleaning his sword. He hums under his breath, a tune with no discernible shape, and occasionally stops to run a thumb along the edge. Not for show, these blades were real tools of survival, less glamorous than they appear in tapestries. Your journey continues, always unfolding, as you explore yet another wing. You pass a door slightly ajar, from which drifts the muffled sound of lute strings being tuned. Someone inside is warming up for tonight's entertainment, testing chords that flutter uncertainly before settling into a mellow cadence. The music mixes with the lingering sense of supper, of burning logs and sun-warmed wool cloaks, and you find yourself oddly lulled, the chaos of castle life softening around the edges. It's in these quiet moments you really begin to feel the pulse of medieval existence, not just the grand feasts or brutal skirmishes, but these soft in-betweens. The way light falls through a slit window onto rough wooden boards. The way people instinctively cluster around warmth or gossip or song. The small comforts woven through lives that were otherwise harsh, uncertain, and frequently cut short. You start to notice how many little signs of domesticity there are. A small carved charm tied above a lintel to keep out bad air. A child's doll made of straw, missing an arm, but lovingly tucked beside a bench. Someone's half-mended stocking, left draped on a stool, forgotten for now. For all the wars and famines history books like to rattle on about, most of life here was probably exactly this: everyday clutter, tiny private labors, hearts hoping simply to be safe and warm for another season. It makes you wonder, what clutter would future eyes find if they wandered through your life? A cracked phone screen? Coffee mugs everywhere? That pile of laundry you swear you'll fold tomorrow? Your footsteps eventually slow. You find yourself back near the great hall again, drawn by the warm orange glow, the soft din of conversation. Someone somewhere laughs, a big, unabashed sound that rolls through the space like a playful giant. You pause at the threshold, just watching, breathing it all in. This is medieval life, up close and unpolished. A mosaic of smells, voices, quick human glances. People gathered not around digital feeds, but actual fires. Their worries were different. When the next harvest might fail, whether the neighboring baron was feeling quarrelsome, if last winter's fever would return. Yet their joys, remarkably familiar. A shared meal, a small joke, the unexpected sweetness of being warm indoors while wind claws harmlessly at the shutters. And here you are, a time traveler cushioned by blankets and modern conveniences, peeking into their candlelit world. Pretty soon, we'll edge into even stranger spaces, the parts of the castle that dealt with the more biological necessities of life. But for now, take one more lingering look around. Let your mind drift lazily through the hall, past the crackling hearth and the low laughter, until your breathing evens out and your muscles sink a fraction deeper into your bed. Because the story is only just beginning, and you're already halfway between your own century and theirs, drifting right along the soft seam where dream meets memory. The firelight of the great hall still clings faintly to your clothes as you wander away, drifting down yet another corridor that seems determined to grow darker and narrower with every step. Your shoes scuff over stones polished by countless feet, and somewhere overhead, wooden beams creak in mild complaint, as though the castle itself were shifting in its ancient sleep. And then, quite suddenly, the smell changes. It's subtle at first, a sort of damp, earthy tang that seems almost innocent, but a few more steps, and it thickens, deepens into something more pungent, less apologetic. You slow down, nose wrinkling despite yourself, because this, dear time traveler, is your first clue that you're nearing one of the castle's most, shall we say, essential features.
Yes, we've arrived at the medieval toilet, or as the locals might call it, the garderobe.
Isn't that a delicate little word? Garderobe. Sounds almost elegant, like a velvet-lined closet where you'd keep brocade gowns and shiny buckles. In fact, in some places, it was used interchangeably for a wardrobe because clothing was sometimes hung there on purpose. Why? Oh, you're gonna love this. People believed that the constant waft of ammonia from the toilet helped kill lice nesting in fabrics, so your finest tunic might spend the night dangling right over the castle's personal indoor abyss. Fresh. Step closer now. Don't worry, this is a purely imaginary tour. Your nose will survive. Peer through this small arched doorway, just wide enough for one sturdy human at a time. Inside, it's a tight stone chamber, barely big enough for you to stand with your elbows out. A narrow slit window lets in a sliver of gray daylight, and the breeze sighing through it carries more than a hint of everything that's ever happened here. Along one side of the wall is the real star of the show, a simple wooden bench built into the stone itself. In the center of the bench is a smooth round hole, and that's it. No privacy screens, no dainty baskets of pine-scented sachets, just the stone, the wood, and the abyss. Because if you lean forward carefully, you'll see that hole open straight down, sometimes a dozen feet, sometimes 2 or 3 stories, depending on the layout. At the bottom, Well, that could be anything from an open pit to the castle's moat, helpfully doubling as a swirling sewer. Imagine the delicate orchestration of gravity and rainfall that kept things from piling up unpleasantly close. And if you're wondering, yes, sometimes the moat was used for fishing or drawing water. Let that swirl around in your mind for a delicious second. Now, picture yourself using this guard rope. It's a brisk morning. There's frost, dusting the castle parapets, and you find yourself in need of, shall we say, relief. You shuffle into this little nook, perch gingerly on the hole, and instantly a gust of icy wind rushes up to greet parts of you that were not prepared for such personal attention. You let out a strangled little squeak. No judgment. Everyone does the first time, and grip the sides of the bench as though the very structural integrity of your dignity depended on it. Meanwhile, that same draft serves another purpose. It carries odors downward and out, keeping the rest of the castle reasonably fresh. Reasonably fresh. Reasonably. Medieval life was all about compromise. Look at the walls around you. See those damp streaks, those little patches of moss. Rain and waste did their quiet work over centuries, seeping through cracks, feeding tiny green ecosystems that no one thought to scrape off. Some garter ropes even had chutes built at an angle so things wouldn't just drop, but would slide. More of a medieval water park for, well, you get the idea. Occasionally, a considerate soul might drop handfuls of straw or ash down the hole, hoping to soak up some of the less pleasant liquids and dampen the smell. Did it help? Probably in the same way that spraying air freshener helps when your cat's been sick on the rug. A noble gesture, if not entirely effective. Let's take a moment to appreciate the brave souls who had to maintain these spaces. Because contrary to romantic legend, castles didn't just clean themselves. There were people, often at the very bottom of the servant hierarchy, who would clamber down to scrape out buildup, patch crumbling stone, or clear blockages. Imagine explaining your job at the local tavern. Ah yes, I'm in waste logistics, highly skilled, very exclusive clientele. And while we're at it, can we also appreciate the sheer audacity of medieval multitasking? Some lords didn't consider the garderobe a purely private matter. Historical records mention nobles conducting conversations, sometimes serious political business, while seated on their personal throne over a literal pit of filth. A squire might stand dutifully nearby, taking notes or holding a letter for review. Try picturing your boss at Monday's meeting, if that were still the standard. Human resource policies would be wildly different. You shuffle back out of the garderobe, relieved in more ways than one, and draw in a lungful of castle air that by comparison seems almost sweet. And then you start to notice other small architectural clues scattered along the outer walls, little protruding stone boxes or narrow vertical shafts. These are garderobes too, poking out like stony parasites. Often they were built right over the outer edge of the walls, so waste could tumble far away, minimizing seepage back into living areas. Of course, nature was not always so cooperative. Heavy rains could flood pits, sending unwelcome surprises back up the chutes. In winter, freezing temperatures turned waste into grotesque sculptures, dangerous in their own right. Imagine slipping on that. Go on, I'll wait while your toes curl in horror. And yet, for all the indignities, this was actually cutting-edge sanitation compared to many common folk. Peasants typically made do with simple wooden outhouses over shallow pits, or even just designated midden corners in their yards. Some might use chamber pots indoors and fling the contents into the street at dawn with a cheerful warning shout of Gardyloo, so passers-by could dart aside. If you were unlucky or simply slow, Your morning stroll came with bonus surprises. You start to see, don't you, how much a garderobe represented both privilege and ingenuity. It was indoor plumbing, sort of. A cold, drafty, occasionally terrifying version, but leagues beyond squatting over a ditch with your neighbors waving from across the fence. And while we're poking fun, it's worth pausing to respect the sheer practicality of it. Medieval people weren't clueless about hygiene. They understood that waste needed to be moved away from living spaces, that airflow reduced stink, and that certain herbs could mask or even help repel pests. They just didn't have pipes and flush valves. What they did have was a healthy tolerance for bodily realities, a tolerance we modern folks in our disinfected tiled bathrooms might struggle to muster. So next time you flick a handle and watch everything whisked away in a swirl of clean water, no chilly updraft, no fear of losing a ring to the depths, take a second to whisper a little thanks to the spirits of the garderobe, or maybe just to gravity itself. For now, linger here a moment longer. Let your senses adjust to this peculiar blend of ingenuity and grime. Hear the distant rumble of carts beyond the walls, the occasional squawk of a gull circling over the moat, hoping for a bit of spoiled bread or something less appetizing. The castle breathes around you, centuries deep, unapologetically human. And we're only getting started, because as pungent and peculiar as the garderobe might be, there's another side of medieval life waiting to greet us. One involving warm water, perfumed herbs, and a shocking twist on just how often people actually bothered to bathe. But let's not hurry. For now, let your imagination savor this awkward little chamber perched over empty air. Marvel at the guts it took to perch here on a windy January morning. And maybe, just maybe, give your modern plumbing a quiet round of applause. You linger by that narrow stone doorway a little longer, oddly transfixed, because as much as your nose wants to run screaming for the hills, your brain, perverse little creature that it is, can't help being fascinated. This small, chilly room, with its single hole and drafty view over the moat, is after all one of the most honest spaces in the whole castle. No silk curtains or gilded tapestries to hide behind, no pompous heralds announcing visitors. Just stone, wood, air, and a basic human reality we've all shared since time began. Step back in and truly stand there for a moment. Imagine placing your hands on the rough bench worn smooth by centuries of other hands, other sighs, other awkward shifts as people tried to get comfortable doing the most natural, least glamorous thing in the world. The wood still holds faint ghostly warmth where the sun touched it hours ago, but the air itself cuts right through your clothing, raising goosebumps along your thighs. You feel the eddy of cold swirling up from that hole, the breath of the outside world invading the last of your personal privacy. Now take a breath through your mouth, if you like. There's a sour edge to it, a reminder of where you are, but also the slightly peppery scent of straw, sometimes spread across the stone floor to catch drips or give bare feet a less shocking landing. Look up. Even the ceiling here bears faint smoke stains. Someone might have carried a lantern in once, holding it high to peer down and check whether things were moving along properly, or if the chute was clogged. A medieval plumber's nightmare. In fact, there were entire little maintenance schedules around these guardrobes. Castles employed laborers who came specifically to keep them functional, scraping out pits with long-handled scoops, pouring buckets of water to encourage reluctant waste downward, patching mortar where years of acidity had eaten away the stone. Imagine trying to keep a polite, regal face when your daily task was to chisel dried refuse off a medieval toilet shaft. Sometimes they'd pour lime into the pits to help break things down and keep odors from becoming truly catastrophic. Did it help? Probably about as much as spraying vanilla air freshener after burning a fish dinner. A nice gesture. Not foolproof, but lime was also mildly disinfectant, and medieval people were cleverer about such things than we often give them credit for. They just didn't understand microbes. They operated by smell and common sense. If it stank less, it probably was safer. Now, step back to that tiny window, cut right into the thick wall. It's narrow, barely wider than your hand, and framed by crumbling mortar, where centuries of damp have done their quiet work. If you lean close enough, you can see little tufts of moss hugging the outer edges. Through it, you glimpse the moat again, glistening in a patch of pale sun that finally broke through the clouds. A duck paddles lazily by, unaware or unconcerned that it's sharing this water with, well, more than minnows. That's another awkward little medieval truth. Many moats doubled as defense and waste disposal. Toss your night soil out a chute. Gravity and rain handled the rest, eventually feeding it into the moat. From there, it might drift merrily away, or not. When sieges came and moats stagnated, the castle defenders often found themselves with a ring of filth that made approaching armies gag before they even loosed an arrow. A gross but strangely effective psychological tactic. Imagine being an invader wading through knee-high sludge just to swing a sword. Suddenly, conquest loses a bit of its romantic shine. But for all its downsides, the guard rope represented a level of privacy and indoor convenience many people in surrounding villages could only dream about. Step back out into the corridor now and notice something interesting. There were often multiple guard ropes placed strategically around large castles. Sometimes you'd find them tucked off the Great Hall, so dinner guests could slip away discreetly. Other times, small double-seaters were installed near family chambers, allowing spouses, or especially close siblings, to conduct their business side by side. Yes, really. Picture yourself seated there, shivering, trying to make polite conversation about last week's feast while studiously not making eye contact. Social boundaries were different. And remember that dual use of the word garderobe. Many castles literally stored garments here. Some noble families believed the ammonia fumes rising from below helped kill fleas and moth larvae. So if you ever wondered whether a lady's gown in the Middle Ages might smell faintly of lavender and faintly of something else, there's your answer. Medieval life didn't draw strict lines between hygiene and practicality. If it worked, even sort of, it was good enough. Stroll with me now down another cold corridor. See those curious stone projections along the outer wall? Little boxes poking out, supported by corbels underneath. Those were garter ropes too, architectural warts with a vital purpose. By building them to jut beyond the wall, any deposits would fall clear, reducing unpleasant seepage back into the castle foundation. In some places, clever engineers even carved channels into the rock so rainwater would sluice through, helping wash things away. It's primitive, but you have to admire the basic hydraulic thinking. Pause at one of these exterior projections and peek inside. It's just wide enough for a small person to crouch, and you spot scratch marks on the stone, maybe from boots scraping nervously against the wall, or hands gripping hard during moments of digestive urgency. The hole here isn't round, but more of an elongated slot, perhaps to accommodate different sizes or encourage a more efficient drop zone. And yes, once in a while, disasters happened. There are scattered stories, likely exaggerated by chroniclers with a sense of humor, about unfortunate souls losing rings, purses, even small pets down these holes. Some more tragic tales tell of people falling in entirely, especially at night after a bit too much ale. It's the sort of anecdote that would have had medieval children giggling and elbowing each other under the supper table. Yet for all the hazards, people still preferred these garderobes to wandering out into the dark with a lantern, hunting for a frosty latrine or exposed pit. You'd rather risk a chilly bottom and an occasional breeze lifting your tunic than the possibility of bandits, wolves, or stumbling over the edge of a ditch you couldn't see. Now, shift your attention to the textures around you. Run your hand over the castle wall. Feel how it flakes in tiny gritty pieces under your palm. Smell the slight metallic tang of old stones soaked with centuries of weather. Hear the faint rush of wind somewhere deeper in the shaft, like a distant sigh. This was a living system, open to air, to rain, to the slow, patient work of insects and moss. A medieval flush, such as it was, depended entirely on nature, lending a helpful hand. Think about what that means for the people who lived here. If a siege cut off water supplies, these systems backed up, waste pits overflowed, defensive structures became liabilities, breeding sickness instead of warding off enemies. In that way, toilets were every bit as strategic as arrow slits or drawbridges, just far less glamorous to sketch into illuminated manuscripts. As you stand there, lost in the odd dignity of this humble space, you might wonder, did medieval people feel the same embarrassment about these functions we do today? The answer is complicated. Certainly, they valued modesty. There were curtains or screens when possible, to shield noble rears from too public a gaze. Yet bodily functions weren't quite the taboo they became in later centuries. Jokes about farting, bathroom needs, and even the occasional body prank appear in court jesters' repertoires. Popular poems poked fun at noisy bellies and inconvenient runs to the garderobe. Humor made life's universal indignities easier to bear. That said, there were also very strict hierarchies of cleanliness and service. The groom of the stool, a real position in royal households, was charged with overseeing the monarch's toileting, even wiping if necessary. It was simultaneously the most intimate, humiliating, and oddly prestigious role because it granted access to the ruler's private moments. Imagine a nobleman bragging over dinner, "Ah yes, today I handed the king his wiping cloth. No greater honor." Social climbing was a perilous business, sometimes quite literally. Now let's soften your imagination a little. Step back from the stone, let the musty odors fade, and breathe in cooler air that smells mostly of rain. Picture servants carrying fresh rushes to be spread over the garderobe floor, perhaps adding crushed mint or thyme. Visualize someone airing out garments near the window, hoping the breeze will whisk away any residual tang. Imagine a cook down in the kitchens complaining that the garderobe's vent shaft runs too close to her pantry, muttering threats about what she'll do if next week's pies come out tasting funny. Life in a castle was a delicate dance of overlapping spaces, smells from the kitchen, warmth from the hearth, voices echoing through stone, and yes, the ever-present specter of the garderobe, quietly doing its duty in the background. Linger here, just a heartbeat more. Press your hand flat against the wall and close your eyes. Hear distant footfalls, someone hurrying up a stair, keys jangling at their waist, maybe a dog barking in the bailey below. Feel how the cold seeps slowly through your palm. This place has seen centuries pass. Countless visitors share the same human necessity, each leaving behind a whisper of breath, a muffled sigh of relief, a shuffle of boots on stone. It's humbling, isn't it? And also oddly soothing, because in this simple, chilly chamber, there's no pretense, no gilded illusion, just people, across time, caught in the same honest, awkward moment, hoping for a quick finish, a clean escape, and a bit of dignity left intact. So when you return to your soft, modern bathroom, with its warm tile underfoot and gentle whoosh of running water, spare a little affectionate thought for these stony garderobes, for the ingenuity and grudging acceptance that built them, and for the countless medieval souls who, just like you, had to navigate the not-so-glamorous necessities of being human. We'll step away now, leaving the echoes of that small drafty room behind, because the castle has other secrets, some warm, some fragrant, some scandalous. And next, we're going to see how these same people who tolerated the gusty chill of the garderobe also pursued the steamy pleasures and surprising dangers of medieval bathing. But let's take our time. After all, your breathing is slow now, your mind is open, and we're in no hurry to leave this tender, peculiar tangle of history just yet. You step away from the garderobe at last, brushing your palms together, as if to shake off not just the memory of that small chill chamber, but the centuries of use clinging to its stones. Back out in the corridor, the air seems a touch kinder, cooler. Yes, but carrying only the simple scent of old stone and drifting hearth smoke blissfully free of ammonia's bite. You pause a moment, just enjoying the ordinary damp castle smell. Strange how quickly the nose recalibrates, isn't it? Already, the drafty hallways seem almost sweet. Now let your feet take you onward, past a pair of bustling scullery maids balancing baskets of laundry, past a tired guard unbuckling his sword belt and grumbling about blisters, down a tight spiral stair that deposits you into a long, low room, dimly lit by a few sputtering candles jammed into iron brackets. Here you find barrels, buckets, a broad wooden tub stained dark by years of water, and a stack of scratchy linen towels folded by someone who probably muttered about how the Lord's family never truly appreciates clean cloth. This is the castle's little washing annex, and you are quite suddenly standing on the threshold of every history myth that ever made you wrinkle your nose. Because let's get this straight right now. People in the Middle Ages did bathe. They liked being warm. They liked smelling vaguely of herbs rather than pure goat, and they appreciated not having lice, at least not in catastrophic quantities. It's just complicated. Run your hand over the rim of that tub. The wood is swollen, faintly sticky in spots from old soapy residues. Inside, it's ribbed with rings where water levels once stood, like the ghost memories of 100 quick splashes. Imagine it filled with steaming water, curling up into the chilly room in thick white tendrils. A servant would have carried heavy buckets from a cauldron simmering somewhere nearby, muscles nodding with each trip. No taps to turn, no instant hot. Each bath was a labor of love, or at least obligation. Now close your eyes and picture yourself lowering into it. Your skin tightens at first, then softens, your whole body sighing out tension. Maybe someone scattered a handful of rosemary or lavender atop the water. Maybe you inhale and catch that bright, almost peppery aroma mixed with the underlying sweet tang of wood. If you're lucky and important enough, a servant might kneel nearby with a small pitcher, pouring warm water over your shoulders so it sheets down your back in a delicious glide. Sounds nice, right? Almost spa-like. And in fact, for many centuries, especially during the early Middle Ages, people across Europe flocked to public bathhouses that weren't all that different from modern communal spas. Picture it. Big wooden halls with giant heated vats, smaller tubs for private soaking, even little platforms where barbers doubled as masseurs, scrubbing scalps or offering to lance the occasional unsightly boil. There was food. There was music. In many towns, a trip to the bathhouse was a whole social evening. Imagine modern hot tub bars, only with fewer neon signs, and probably more wandering minstrels tuning lutes with exaggerated pouts. Medieval records even show that many towns had bylaws requiring bathhouses to be well maintained and affordable. Clean, warm water wasn't just a luxury, it was a community expectation. People worried about dirt, about skin ailments, about the moral decay of going around looking shabby and unwashed. So where did we get this persistent cartoon of the filthy medieval peasant who never met a bath he liked? Part of it comes from later centuries. During waves of plague, most infamously the Black Death, people began fearing that opening their pores made them more susceptible to bad air or miasma, which they believed carried disease. Medical texts soberly warned against long soaks, suggesting that water could weaken the skin's natural defenses. So over time, many nobles and cautious burghers cut back on bathing, relying instead on frequent linen changes, sprigs of aromatic herbs pinned to collars, and enough rose water to drown a small orchard. But that didn't happen overnight, and it didn't erase hundreds of years of soak-loving culture. In fact, in many places, especially among the common folk, who were less governed by fashionable paranoia, people continued to enjoy baths, just perhaps less grandly, less publicly, and more seasonally. Step closer to that tub again. Peer inside and let your imagination play. You might see a knight easing down with a hiss, grateful for hot water after days in the saddle. A lady dipping her toes first, wincing at the heat. A gaggle of younger squires banished to a smaller tub together, dunking each other and squealing like overgrown children. If you listen carefully, you might even catch half-whispered confessions, or the slow rise of a folk song, voices twining into a simple harmony that echoes off the damp walls. Then again, you might catch the quiet sound of teeth chattering, because without dedicated heating systems, these rooms were only ever as warm as the fires and stones could keep them. A single open door could send a cruel draft skimming across the water's surface, raising goosebumps in a second. Many baths ended with a quick scramble out, hurried toweling, and a dash back to thick wool garments layered over still damp skin. Run your fingertips along the towel stack. Coarse linen that feels more like an exfoliation mitt than anything plush. A servant spent hours washing these by hand, scrubbing them over wooden boards, wringing them out so hard her knuckles probably still ache. There's no scent of lavender softener, no bright detergent, just the faint lye tang of homemade soap, sharp and clean in its own assertive way. Now follow me around a corner. Here you'll find the big barrels used to ferry water, most still damp inside, smelling of char from when they were scorched, to sanitize them. A clever precaution, though occasionally the water arrived with an odd smoky aftertaste. Not that anyone here would complain much. Warm was warm. Let your mind drift further, because not all baths happened in private corners. Throughout much of medieval life, particularly in bustling market towns, the public bathhouse was a linchpin of community. Imagine it larger than this small castle space, a broad building with rows of tubs, water steaming under rafters, darkened by years of vapor. Women might cluster together, scrubbing each other's backs, sharing the latest local scandal in voices that rose and fell like flocks of birds. Men might settle into deeper pools, half closing their eyes, pretending not to eavesdrop on each other's dubious business ventures. Children darted between them all, chasing scraps of soap, slipping and sliding until a sharp-tongued bath mistress barked them back to order. And yes, sometimes these bathhouses gained reputations that went beyond hygiene. In certain towns, they blurred into brothels, or at least into places where flirtations flourished a little too freely. Chronicles from the period loved to wag their moral fingers at such goings-on, scribbling darkly about lascivious minglings that threatened the very fabric of good Christian society, which of course only ensured that plenty of people continued to visit, undeterred by lectures. Human curiosity and desire has always been harder to scrub away than dirt. Meanwhile, out in the countryside, families made do with simpler arrangements. A wooden tub in front of the hearth, filled from a kettle, swung off the hook over the flames. The water grew cloudy fast, which is why baths often rotated by household rank. Father first, then mother, then children in descending order of both age and luck. By the end, you were effectively sitting in human soup. But it was warm, and for a few precious moments, your body could forget the chill drafts snaking under doorways. Imagine being that youngest child, slipping into already tepid, slightly murky water, teeth chattering, but giggles still escaping as your mother scrubbed behind your ears. The dog lying nearby might wrinkle its nose at the steamy smell, a pungent brew of sweat, ash, and cheap soap, but you'd emerge pinker than you went in. Step back from the tub now, letting these overlapping images fade. Peer around at the walls. See where moisture has stained them a deeper gray. Some places sprout tiny green lichens, daring pioneers of damp. If you listen, you might almost catch a faint drip from somewhere, a ghost of countless baths long finished. It all builds a picture so different from that lazy modern stereotype of filthy, terrified of water medievals. These people did wash, sometimes extravagantly, sometimes with quick splashes and sharp squeals. They did it for comfort, for health, even for status, because clean linen and scented oils were marks of prosperity, as clear as a shiny ring. Lean your head back for a moment, eyes half closed. Imagine your own hair wet, heavy against your neck. Feel droplets tracing down your spine, warm for an instant, then cool as air finds them. You might catch yourself sighing, just a little, because even now, the thought of a hot bath, after days in stiff wool and muddy boots, is one of the most timeless pleasures imaginable. So next time you slip into your sleek porcelain tub, dial the faucet to exactly your perfect degree, and pour in something that smells like coconut daydreams. Spare a grin for these old creaky tubs, for the maids who lugged heavy buckets up stone stairs, for the lord who sank in with a groan of relief, hoping the rosemary masked the garlic still on his breath, for the bustling bathhouses where townsfolk laughed, plotted, and loved with equal enthusiasm. And know that under all the rust and rushes, they weren't so very different from you, seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking, just for a little while, to be clean and cared for in a world that often was anything but gentle. We'll wander deeper into that notion soon, into how personal hygiene became tangled up with moral suspicion, and how perfumed handkerchiefs and layered linen tried heroically to pick up the slack. But for now, rest your mind right here. Let the steam fade slowly around you. Your breathing's grown soft again, hasn't it? Perfect. Because the story of medieval bodies is still unfolding, and you're exactly where you're meant to be to hear it. You linger there by the tubs a little longer, almost reluctant to leave the gentle ghost of steam that clings to this part of the castle. But curiosity, ever a loyal little demon perched on your shoulder, eventually nudges you onward. Your feet carry you back through corridors where the stone feels just slightly damp to the touch, like bread left out too long, soft at the edges. Soon you emerge into another wide hall, though this one is plainer, more workaday. And here your nose twitches, because if the bathing rooms carried a hint of lavender or boiled soap, this space is a riot of every other smell medieval life had to offer, stacked, swirled, and sometimes positively wrestling for dominance. Take a slow breath. Let it fill your lungs, right to the bottom. What do you notice first? There's the dense, savory aroma of roasted meat wafting from some unseen kitchen, heavy with fat and browned skin, and the bright tang of onions scorching on the hearthstone. That's pleasant enough, comforting even, like passing a bustling food stall on a modern street. But it doesn't get to keep the stage for long, because underneath that floats the raw, slightly sour smell of damp wool cloaks hung by the door, still releasing traces of last night's drizzle. There's the earthier note of straw, laid down to catch mud and manure before it could be ground too deeply into rushes. Straw now half rotted and giving off a faint whiff of compost. And there, almost sweet, almost floral, but tinged with something more feral, is the unmistakable signature of human bodies. Unwashed, not exactly, just alive, warm, working, eating, sweating, loving, all crammed together in this stone hive. Pause a second. Smile to yourself, because however scandalized your modern sensibilities might be, there's also something weirdly intimate about it. These mingled scents are honest. They tell the story of a community pressed close, of shared hearths, shared chores, even shared lice, of people who could probably identify each other by smell alone, who accepted the press of shoulders and mingling of breaths as part of what it meant to belong. Wander a bit closer to one of the wooden benches set against the wall. It's stained by countless backsides, sometimes smoothed to a glossy polish, where a merchant's heavy woolen trousers or a maid's many skirts settled day after day. Someone's left a half-finished trencher here, a hollowed crust of bread still holding a smear of gravy. A fat blue-bottle fly sits regally atop it, waving its front legs as if applauding the feast. You lean closer, perhaps a little unwisely, and catch the warm, meaty perfume of the sauce, immediately chased by the sharper vinegar sting of the pickle beside it. Together they make a pungent duet. Someone's stomach nearby lets out a squeak of interest. Was it yours? No judgment. This place works on all your senses. Now draw back and look around. See how close the people sit, how even conversations conducted in whispers would spill their words across neighboring laps. How personal space is something modern minds invented out of luxury. Here elbows brush without apology. You might find a boy leaning against a stranger's knee, utterly at ease while his mother bargains with a vendor. The vendor himself might lean over, eyes bright with gossip, his breath full of ale and last night's garlic stew, dropping confidences right into your unsuspecting ears. It's easy to imagine how this intimate stew of sense built not only tolerance, but a sort of collective immunity to disgust. In a world where streets sometimes doubled as open sewers, where fishmongers' stalls leaked brine into the same gutters that carried off chamber pot contents, people simply adapted. Their noses learned which smells spelled actual danger, gangrene, rotting grain, milk gone too far sour, and which were merely part of life's aromatic background noise. But don't mistake this for carelessness. Even amid all these competing fragrances, medieval folks craved freshness. That's why lavender was stuffed into cushions, why rosemary and mint were bundled together and hung from ceiling beams, why windows were thrown open despite biting drafts. They might not have known the word bacteria, but they understood that certain scents meant sickness, and other scents seemed to ward it off. Picture a well-to-do lady fussing with a pomander, a small, beautifully worked metal ball, perforated like a delicate cage, filled with cloves, crushed herbs, sometimes soaked cotton wads dipped in rose oil. She holds it to her nose with almost theatrical delicacy whenever someone particularly ripe wanders past. Was it more show than necessity? Probably. but also a little sphere of psychological armor against the pungent unpredictability of life. Even poorer folk made modest attempts. Bundles of tansy and sage tied above the hearth, a sprig of juniper tucked into a hatband. Medieval wisdom held that sweet herbs gladden the heart. And who could argue? Even if the medicinal value was questionable, the comfort was real. Maybe you do the same without realizing it. Choosing a shampoo that smells like coconuts not for your scalp's health, but because it sends your mind somewhere sunlit. Shift your attention again. See that man seated on a low stool, pulling off his boots. As he tugs them free, a visible sigh of relief escapes him, and probably an invisible cloud of foot-related fragrance. His hose are dark at the toes, perhaps slightly damp, and when he sets the boots down, he turns them upside down so the insides can air. Smart. Not exactly odor-free, but smarter than sealing the stew inside for tomorrow. And over there by the hearth, two old women sit almost knee to knee, repairing tears in each other's cloaks. They lean in close, speaking softly, their voices half lost in the snap and hiss of burning logs. If you stood right between them, you'd likely catch a whisper of sweat mingled with onion breath and the faint, comforting rankness of well-worn wool. It's a scent that would cling to you long after, as if you'd been folded into a big, prickly embrace. The fireplace dominates this room, and not just visually. It's a living engine, drawing air from all corners and sending it, smoky, seasoned, slightly greasy, up the wide chimney. Bits of ash drift down again, peppering hair and shoulders. In some places, the stone above the hearth is so blackened it seems almost to sweat soot. No wonder the castle's overall perfume is such a rich tapestry, when walls themselves spend generations soaking up meals, accidents, laughter, illness, and countless muddy boots. It's a wonder they don't simply walk off one night to start lives of their own. Take another long, slow inhale. Let the complexity of it settle into you. The salt of drying meat, the green sharpness of herbs hanging in bundles, the faint copper tang where someone's knife nicked a finger earlier, the lingering echo of lavender stuffed into a rush mat last season, the underlying human musk alive, laboring, endlessly present. Ask yourself, would you thrive here, or would your modern, delicately shampooed nose crumble at the sheer, unfiltered reality of it all? Maybe you'd surprise yourself. Maybe after a week, you'd start recognizing people by the subtle signature of their skin, their soap, if they used any, the meals lingering on their breath. You might even grow fond of it, like loving the smell of someone's worn hoodie, which is equal parts detergent and something uniquely them. And isn't that part of why we're here tonight, floating through these ancient halls together, to remember that humanity has always been a little bit fragrant, for better or worse? That closeness was often literal, crowded under shared blankets in winter, shoulders pressed together at market stalls, noses full of each other's hopes, secrets, and ordinary mortal funk. So when the histories talk loftily about feasts, crusades, dynasties rising and falling, spare a smile for the real truth. Medieval people carried their stories and their smells too, in the tang of salt crusted on a sailor's collar, the perfume of beeswax lingering on a monk's sleeve from hours of candle dipping, the kitchen maid's hands scented with parsley and meat fat, even after 3 attempts at scrubbing, the young squire who nervously overdosed on rosewater before meeting a lady's family, only to end up choking them all on cloying sweetness, the armor polished with vinegar that still somehow couldn't mask the sweat soaking the padded gambeson beneath. Breathe it all in one last time here before we wander off. Let your mind drift lazily through this fragrant labyrinth, both sweet and sour, gentle and eye-watering, honest above all. You might even let out a soft laugh at how little separates then from now, how we still fuss with colognes, scented candles, potpourri bowls, all trying to balance comfort with the truth of living bodies. Your shoulders ease again. Your breath grows slower, deeper, because you're beginning to see that beneath the flickering torches and clatter of wooden plates, medieval life was astonishingly human in all the same messy ways we are. Stay with me. There's still more to explore, more curious contrasts, more small revelations waiting like secrets under old floorboards. But for now, rest your thoughts here among these mingled perfumes, and know that in this moment, in this hush between stories, you're exactly where you belong, shared softly with every traveler who's ever paused, sniffed the air, and grinned at how very alive the world truly is. You take another slow breath, letting your lungs fill with that peculiar medieval bouquet, part feast, part stable, part warm skin pressed under wool. Then, content for the moment to have tested your modern gag reflex, you slip along the corridor again, feet whispering over uneven stones. This time, we're going to let our senses shift from the nose to something more panoramic, taking in not just smells, but the whole orchestra of castle life, the overlapping sounds, the ever-changing temperatures, the textures under your fingertips. Because living in a castle was not some hushed, dignified museum tableau. It was a living, clanking, barking, bellowing place. Start by noticing the temperature. Just there by the hearth, it was pleasantly warm, almost too warm if you stayed long enough for your shins to bake while your back shivered. But only a few steps away, by these thick outer walls, the chill seeps in as if the stones themselves draw breath from some frosty underworld. Run your hand along the wall. Feel how it's damp in patches, gritty with bits of loosened mortar, colder than your fingertips by many degrees. A medieval castle had no insulation. Heat was something you chased, not something the building graciously provided. Now drift past a heavy wooden door that someone left slightly ajar. Hear that, the faint splash of water, maybe a laundress wringing out linens, her hands red from hours of plunging them into icy basins. Hear the soft thump of fabric snapped out, the sharper crack as she flings it over a line to dry. A few paces on, you'd catch an entirely different soundscape. Voices, laughter, the scrape of a chair leg across stone, a child's squeal as someone snatches away a toy. From within that chamber spills the muffled thunder of feet, someone dancing perhaps, maybe practicing a simple jig to the beat of hands clapping time. No record player here. Music was human, immediate, imperfect. The best melodies still had someone's uneven breath in them. Let your eyes roam to a corner where a couple of dogs lounge, snouts on paws, eyes following every passerby with that bored watchfulness only dogs can perfect. They smell vaguely of damp fur, and whatever scraps they manage to steal from the kitchen last. Every so often one sighs, an enormous melodramatic gust that seems to say, "This life of noble service is exhausting, you know." Now look upward. See those enormous beams crisscrossing the ceiling? They're dark with years of soot, sticky in places where old smoke once condensed. Somewhere above, a pigeon may have squeezed in through a cracked slate, cooing softly to itself. You might even hear the faint rustle of wings. That's the thing about castles. No matter how fortress-like they appear from the outside, they were never entirely sealed. Small animals found ways in. Spiders claimed corners. Drafts prowled the halls like curious spirits. Shift your attention again, this time to the floor. Underfoot are rushes, strewn thick, meant to soak up the worst of the mess. They crunch slightly with each step. If you look closely, you'll see bits of herb stalks mixed in, maybe a stray chicken feather or a glint of dropped barley. When the rushes were finally swept out and replaced, not as often as you'd wish, entire worlds went with them. Lost beads, pins, even the occasional coin that had rolled off during a boisterous meal and been swallowed by the floor's living carpet. Walk a little farther and notice how the atmosphere shifts yet again. Near a side door, cold air knifes in, sharp enough to tighten the skin around your cheeks. Someone pushes past you, carrying a basket of turnips, muttering under their breath about the wind. It tugs at their skirts, setting the cloth to billowing like a small ship's sail. Now pause. Just stand there a second. Soak in the layers of it all. A hall that's simultaneously chilly and stifling by turns. Walls that sweat in winter. Floors that whisper under your boots. Rooms that might roar with noise one moment, then seem eerily silent the next. And above all, people. So many people. Servants rushing about with urgent faces. Pages trying to look important as they carry messages. A groom leading a horse through a side gate, its iron shoes striking sparks on the stone. A cook's boy slipping on a slick patch of floor, then bursting into nervous giggles when he realizes no one's cross enough to scold him today. It's a glorious mess, far from the stiff formality we often imagine when we picture medieval nobles in tapestries. These castles were busy, bustling, and more than a little chaotic. Want to peek into the great hall again? Just for a contrast? Push open the heavy door with its iron strap hinges. Inside, warmth rolls over you in a tangible wave. There's a feast underway. Platters of steaming food passed from hand to hand. Goblets raised in casual toasts. A minstrel stands by the hearth with a small harp, plucking out a tune that wobbles slightly on a sour note. Nobody seems to mind. A lady sits nearest the fire, her gown so close to the flames you wonder how it doesn't smolder, though her cheeks are already pink with heat. The smells here are robust. Roasted pork, studded with garlic, a hint of nutmeg in someone's cup of wine, the musky tang of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. Every laugh seems to echo twice, once off the high beams, once inside your own ribs, and over it all lingers that constant undercurrent of wood smoke, so thick you suspect it's woven into every tapestry. Now here's something to smile at. Even in this grand space, look carefully, and you'll find reminders that castles were living organisms, not sterile monuments. A dog lies under the table, hoping for bones. A page leans against the wall, eyes half closed from exhaustion. A stray chicken that wandered in through the kitchens pecks hopefully at crumbs. This was no silent, sacred hall. It was alive with breath, hunger, restlessness, and yes, the occasional loud belch after too much ale. Step back out with me, quietly. The door closes behind us with a low boom that rattles in your chest. Back in the corridor, the air feels simpler again, colder. You almost miss the riot of smells and sounds. Almost. Now here's a thought to keep you company as we wander. For all the stone grandeur, medieval castles were actually a bit like enormous, somewhat drafty dormitories. Hundreds of people lived here together. Lords, ladies, servants, guards, cooks, falconers, stable boys. They laughed, fought, shared gossip, napped by fires, wept over letters. They complained about the damp. They grumbled that the mutton was tough this week. They flirted in corners. They snuck extra honey cakes when no one was watching. Think about how similar that is to your own home, even if your walls are drywall instead of granite. The little domestic dramas, the petty complaints, The joy of warm food on a cold day. The relief of getting off your feet after hours of bustling about. Strip away the chainmail and elaborate titles, and people here weren't so very different. Run your fingers along the wall again. Feel how it's pitted and rough. Imagine how many hands did the same, steadying themselves as they rushed by with armfuls of linens or trays of pies. How many lovers pressed each other against these stones for a quick stolen kiss? How many children leaned here, scratching pictures into the softer mortar with bits of stick, only to be scolded by a passing nurse? Close your eyes for a second. Let the castle breathe around you. Hear a distant shout from the courtyard, someone calling for more wood to be hauled in. Hear boots clattering on a staircase, the faint hush of a door closing somewhere far off. It's a chorus, unplanned and beautifully mundane. And all the while, there's this curious paradox. Medieval castles look so intimidating from the outside. Solid, cold, unyielding. Walls meant to keep dangers out, moats to deter attackers, arrow slits like narrowed, suspicious eyes. Yet inside, they held exactly what we'd hope for in any home. Warmth, laughter, squabbles over chores, someone stealing the last piece of pie. Even the drafts seem friendlier now, don't they? Less an unwelcome intruder than a reminder that the castle is alive, porous, breathing, ever-adjusting. It inhales the scents of the kitchens, the breath of dancers, the wet fur of hunting dogs. It exhales cold breezes that swirl down the hall, tugging at your cloak like a playful child. Stand there a little longer with me, shoulder to shoulder. Take it all in, the mingled music of footsteps and snatches of song, the smells that drift by in slow, invisible rivers, the sudden burst of laughter that startles a pigeon off a rafter. Let your heart slow to the rhythm of this place, because beyond the armored gates and stern battlements, this was simply a great, glorious tangle of human lives. Noisy, smelly, heartfelt, tender in ways that rarely make it into official histories. When you're ready, we'll wander on, because there are still hidden corners to explore, tiny rooms where linens hang, drying, or secret stairwells where a sleepy servant might curl up out of sight. But for now, just breathe and listen, and know that you've stepped into the honest, beating heart of medieval daily life. And isn't it oddly soothing to discover how familiar it all feels, even separated by so many stubborn centuries? You stand there a moment longer, shoulder brushing the wall, still savoring the symphony of clatters, laughter, snoring dogs, and drafty sighs that give the castle its living pulse. Then, with a little amused sigh of your own, you begin wandering again, letting your feet choose the next adventure. They take you, quite inevitably, back toward that most delightfully awkward feature of medieval architecture, the garderobe. Because our story tonight isn't quite done with toilets, not by a long shot. Slip down this narrower corridor with me, where the light grows dimmer and the air cools sharply. Your breath shows faintly in the gloom. It smells of cold stone and old damp. At the end, tucked discreetly off to the side, waits another small arched doorway. Beyond it, the familiar hollow of the castle's private toilet. Except this one is different. Peer inside. It's slightly larger than the cramped little niches we explored earlier. There's a modest bench with a hole, of course. Nothing revolutionary there, but also a small window that lets in a shaft of pale daylight, illuminating the space in a surprisingly gentle glow. A low stool stands by the door, and carved into the wall is a shallow alcove, perfect for resting a candlestick, a cup, or perhaps even a document. Yes, a document, Because believe it or not, some nobles conducted very real business here. Quite literally. Imagine yourself seated on that chilly wooden plank, garments bunched awkwardly around your thighs. The air rises up from the shaft beneath you in a faintly apologetic swirl, cool enough to raise goosebumps. But there you are, crown of the household, master of your tiny drafty kingdom, waiting for gravity to do its work. And there, standing just inside the door, or perched on that modest stool, is your loyal attendant. Perhaps he's holding a sheaf of papers. Perhaps he's reading out the latest missives from neighboring lords. Or perhaps he's simply waiting, eyes respectfully lowered, ready to hand you a fresh cloth or pour a bit of water to rinse. How's that for a power dynamic? Even your bodily functions become part of the household's political machinery. The attendant might catch you at your most physically vulnerable, but he's there because you trust him, because he has proven loyal enough to be granted access to these intimate moments. And it wasn't just nobles. In some bustling castle households, even lesser lords or wealthy guests might expect servants to linger nearby, maybe to hold a cloak out of the way, maybe to keep them company, or less glamorously, to chase away the curious dogs that always seemed to nose their way in wherever something smelled interesting. Let your mind spin on that a second. We modern folk like to pretend we're so above it all, closing bathroom doors with little sighs of relief, cherishing our bubbles of solitude. But for centuries, such privacy was a rare luxury. Life was too intertwined, too crowded, too communal. If you were rich, your very importance was partly defined by the retinue you kept people literally waiting on you, even when nature called. Imagine the awkward conversations. A steward shuffles through parchment. My lord, the grain levy from Westfield has arrived short again. Well, tell them I expect full weight by Michaelmas, or I'll send men to weigh it myself. Also, hand me that cloth. Yes, thank you. Or perhaps a young page stands awkwardly by the door, trying to look anywhere but at your lordly knees. His face turns pink. You, seasoned in such rituals, give a small, amused cough. Boy, fetch more rushes from the hall, and tell the cook I'll be down shortly to see today's roast. Practical, businesslike, bizarrely matter-of-fact. And it wasn't only men. Some noble women, especially elderly or ailing ones, might have a favorite maid stand by to assist, a hand on the elbow for balance, a gentle word if the chamber was drafty and her joints ached, whole layers of trust woven through these unglamorous duties. Pause with me here, leaning lightly against the stone. Let the idea swirl around that power and intimacy often wore strange clothes in medieval life. Being so trusted, you could enter your lord's garderobe. That was not just a job, it was a sign of your secure place in his world, potentially your ticket to small influence. Whispered favors, gentle confidences exchanged over the simplest acts of being human. There's even a sort of dark humor in how universal this was. All the splendor of gold-threaded tunics, the stern faces and stained-glass windows, the towering statues outside the chapel. None of it changed the fact that at some point, every dignitary wound up here, legs chilly, sighing impatiently, hoping yesterday's festival feast didn't come back to haunt him in too dramatic a fashion. Let's make it playful. Picture a grand council underway in the great hall. Tense voices, hands gripping dagger hilts in emphasis. Then, suddenly, the Lord excuses himself with a tight smile and bustles off to this little nook, trailed by his steward, who's still reading out the grievances of local tenants. Serious faces, serious words, punctuated by the entirely unserious noises echoing from beneath the stone bench. Try holding your dignified frown through that. Or think of the poor servant, trying valiantly not to snort as his master insists on discussing troop allocations while fumbling to keep his robe clear of the seat. The stone here holds the faintest indentations from all those who fidgeted nervously, drummed fingers, perhaps even scratched little idle marks into the mortar to pass the time. Crouch down. Run your hand lightly along the low edge of the wall. Feel where it's been smoothed, not by tools but by centuries of cloaks brushing past, boots shifting, elbows steadying. Such subtle wear, yet it speaks volumes. Now close your eyes. Imagine all the snippets of conversation that floated here, mingled with chilly drafts and little startled gasps when the wind found tender places. Decisions made that would change harvest rents or decide who married whom, or whether the castle invested in fresh arrow stocks for the next tourney, all with someone perched over a hole in the floor. Doesn't it make you giggle, just a little? The mighty wheels of feudal power, oiled by the same awkward rituals you perform after your morning coffee. And yet there's something oddly tender in it too. The normalcy, the reminder that no matter how many titles someone carried, duke, lady, bishop, they were still tangled up in the same fragile, occasionally embarrassing business of existing in a human body, and that vulnerability wove strange little bonds of trust. The lord might confide a private worry to his steward while buttoning his tunic afterward. The maid might gain her lady's lifelong gratitude by quietly pretending not to notice her discomfort on a bad day. A young page might later boast to friends about standing guard at such moments, feeling oddly proud of being trusted. Breathe it in. This mingling of power and frailty, dignity and awkwardness. It's as much a part of the medieval tapestry as banners fluttering over jousts or monks chanting in candlelit choirs. Now take a step back out of this small chamber. Feel the warmer air of the hallway close around you again, carrying hints of bread baking somewhere distant. Let the draft from the garderobe fade off your skin. Think of your own life for a heartbeat. How you close the bathroom door, run the fan, maybe light a little scented candle so your roommate doesn't tease you later. How you pretend that some functions are purely private, shielded from the world. Medieval folk understood privacy differently. They were more matter-of-fact, more communal, for better or worse. Maybe they were a bit tougher, or maybe they were simply used to lives that required more interdependence, where every task, even the most humble, was shared, witnessed, folded into the gentle bonds of a household. Rest your thoughts here. Let them hover in this cool corridor where the echoes of past conversations, earnest, embarrassing, every day, still seem to murmur against the stone. Feel your shoulders ease down, another fraction, your breath grows slower again. Because even when exploring the least glamorous corner of the castle, there's something strangely comforting in realizing everyone, no matter how powerful, had to perch on that same cold bench. And tomorrow, if you find yourself fussing over a locked bathroom door, or embarrassed by your own very human noises, maybe you'll smile, because somewhere, centuries ago, a grand lord with gold rings on every finger was doing exactly the same thing, with a poor steward standing nearby, trying desperately to keep a straight face. We'll drift onward soon, toward peasants' more rustic setups, where simplicity and the open sky were the only privacy available. But for now, pause here and savor this small, warm bit of perspective. It's a little ridiculous, a little sweet, and entirely human. And isn't that exactly why we're here together tonight? You step quietly away from the last garderobe, letting the cooler, cleaner air of the passage slide over you like a sigh of relief. But of course, relief is relative, because just beneath your feet, beyond all these careful stone channels and clever architectural drops, was another world entirely. A world that someone had to keep from quite literally overflowing. Imagine, if you will, following these winding stone veins, deeper, deeper, until they finally emptied into collection pits tucked below the castle or into a particularly unlucky section of the moat. Those pits didn't empty themselves, and therein lies the story of a certain breed of medieval worker, rarely sung about by courtly poets, hardly ever carved into glorious cathedral arches, but utterly crucial all the same. These were the men whose daily toil was, well, let's just say it was close to the ground. Picture one now, trudging across the outer yard at dawn, shoulders already hunched from the weight of his tools. He wears thick leather boots, soaked through at the seams, darkened permanently by substances that no washboard could ever fully coax away. The air around him carries a sour tang that even the castle dogs give a wary berth. His name might be Thomas, or Will, or Hal, a simple, sturdy name for a simple, sturdy man. His pay is modest. He gets a handful of coins for each pit cleaned, or perhaps a jug of ale to sweeten the arrangement. Enough to buy bread and onions, maybe a bit of salt pork if he's lucky. Enough to keep him tied to this work, because who else would dare take it? Watch as he approaches the castle's outer wall. A small side door creaks open, probably unlocked for him by some sleepy porter who quickly retreats to avoid sharing the lingering perfume of Tomas's trade. He steps inside, hefts his long-handled scoop, and begins his rounds. First, there's the ritual of it. A pause to roll up sleeves, to check that the leather straps binding his trousers are still tight. Then down into the pits, often by ladder if he's unlucky, by cautious leaning if he's slightly more blessed. The ground here is a dark, glistening slurry, soft in all the wrong ways. It squelches around his boots, tries to cling and suck him down, like it knows he's the only thing standing between it and a catastrophic flood through the lower chambers. The smell is exactly what you'd expect: a punch of ammonia, rot, damp straw, and something sharply metallic that makes the back of the throat tighten. He mutters under his breath, curses, prayers, little working songs to keep rhythm as he digs. The scoop sinks in with a sound best not described too closely. He lifts, swings, dumps, over and over. Somewhere above, castle life goes on oblivious. A lady complains her new gown itches. A knight instructs a boy to polish his spurs. A cook tests broth with a splash of wine. None of them think much about the man below, ankle deep in their leavings, ensuring they don't wake tomorrow to find the floor suspiciously damp. Pause here. Imagine what his hands look like by the end of the day. Even after scrubbing them raw at the trough, bits of grime cling under the nails. His boots, perpetually damp, probably host their own miniature swamp ecosystems. When he trudges home at dusk, shoulders sagging, eyes squinting against the last low sun, he'll be given a wide berth, perhaps even a crude joke, shouted by a group of boys perched on a fence. "Careful, Tomas. You've brought half the garderobe with you again." "Aye, and better than bringing your sister, which is more than I can say for you lot. There's a rough affection in it, even if it stings. Because while they mock, they also keep their distance out of genuine respect, blended with squeamish gratitude. They might wrinkle their noses and pretend to gag, but no one's lining up to take the shovel from his hands. In fact, Let your imagination tiptoe into Tomas's modest cottage at the edge of the village. It's small, thatch-roofed. The walls wattle and daub. Inside, it smells mostly of old wood smoke, dried onions, maybe a faint echo of the day's labor clinging to his clothes no matter how often his wife boils them. The family cat-wise creature that she is circles him once, then hops onto the bench just out of reach, tail flicking in judgment. Poor Tomas. Even the cat's suspicious of his boots. But watch how his children scramble to greet him anyway. They tug at his hands, chatter about their tiny adventures, who found the biggest snail, who climbed the tree highest. His wife shakes her head fondly, sets a bowl of pottage before him, and after a sip or two, after his shoulders slowly drop from their perpetual hunch, after his son dares to scramble up into his lap despite the day's lingering aroma, you realize this man is not pitiable. He is indispensable. In his quiet way, he's every bit as crucial to the castle's shining dinners and cozy hearth gatherings as the lord who feasts upstairs. And so we owe him and all his anonymous kin across hundreds of castles a moment of gentle tribute. Because without Tomas, the stories we've been telling tonight would be far messier, quite literally. Now, step back outside with me. Let the evening air clear your nose. The sun is sinking, painting the castle towers in streaks of gold that seem too beautiful to belong to a world so practical, so occasionally filthy. It's time we wander beyond these stone walls, past the guard towers and drawbridge, out into the broader patchwork of fields and villages. Because for all the curious complexities of castle garderobes and the humble heroes who maintained them, most medieval folk answered nature's calls in simpler, earthier ways. Picture a little farmstead tucked at the edge of a wood. Chickens scratch in the yard. A dog dozes with its snout on its paws. The house itself leans a bit, as if nodding at every gust of wind. Behind it stands a small wooden structure, half shed, half afterthought, its walls loosely planked, with gaps that let the breeze and all manner of curious insects drift through. This is the peasant's privy, or more commonly, it might not even be a structure at all, just a designated corner behind a low fence, a patch of ground where someone's laid a modest bed of straw or broad leaves. Crouch there for a moment. Feel how the ground is softer underfoot, the grass patchier, the soil darkened by frequent enrichment. Because yes, human waste was often collected, sometimes carefully, sometimes haphazardly, and carted off to nourish the fields. Why waste perfectly good fertilizer? If your cabbages grew suspiciously robust, you didn't ask too many questions. Ah, so that's why the village carrots look like they're on medieval steroids. And you'd be right. A rude little miracle of the nitrogen cycle. There's humor in it, certainly, but also a deep practicality. Peasants didn't have stone garderobes or long chutes whisking away unpleasantness. Their lives were closer to the soil in every sense. A privy here, a midden heap there, sometimes nothing at all but a hedgerow to squat behind on cold mornings while you muttered a quick apology to any startled hedgehogs. And yet, it worked. The village survived, the crops grew, children laughed, lovers met behind barns, even if the air carried a faint whiff of yesterday's cabbage. Their tolerance for such rustic realities was simply broader than ours, tempered by necessity, by a lifetime spent under the same sky that rained equally on cow dung, pig pens, and hopeful barley shoots. Let your nose wrinkle with a soft laugh, because somewhere under all the charm of wattle fences and bleating goats, medieval life had no illusions. It was earthy, it was immediate, and maybe, in its own rude way, it was refreshingly honest. So pause with me here at the edge of this little yard, where tomorrow's turnips quietly fatten in soil that owes a debt to last season's privy. Take a breath that's half grin, half thoughtful sigh, because whether you lived in a drafty stone castle with Thomas scrubbing your pits, or in a crooked farmhouse squatting under the moon, life's simplest needs still wove everyone into the same inevitable, slightly pungent circle. We'll follow this trail onward soon, toward bathhouses and bubbling wooden tubs, the other side of medieval hygiene where things get surprisingly luxurious or scandalously steamy. But for now, stand here with me a little longer. Let your mind hover over Thomas trudging home, over cabbage patches heavy with tomorrow's supper, over the low laughter drifting from cottage windows as twilight wraps the village in its gentle, forgiving hush. Because this, too, was the heartbeat of the Middle Ages. Rough, humble, oddly poetic. A reminder that under all the legends of knights and ladies, most stories still began and ended with the same earthy truths. Isn't it strangely comforting that no matter how far back you wander, people were simply people, sometimes mocked for their smell, sometimes adored for their warm presence, but always connected by the same humble threads that run right through us, even now? Stand here with me a moment longer, at the edge of that crooked little farmyard. Feel how the last of the sun slips down behind the trees, painting everything in a syrupy gold. You hear the soft ruckus of chickens settling on their roost, the creak of a door as someone calls the dog inside. A pot clangs faintly against a hearth, promising supper, and drifting under it all is that honest, unmistakable country perfume, damp earth, warm straw, and the faint musk of animals who never bothered with etiquette. This is where we find ourselves now, not in the echoing halls of stone castles or their draughty garderobes, but right here in the humble heart of medieval peasant life. A place where practicality always trumped pride, and where toilets were about as simple as they come. Follow the narrow dirt path behind the little thatched house. Your boots squelch now and then, pressing into softer patches where rain and other things have soaked deep. Look to your right, see a modest wooden shed cobbled together from mismatched planks. Some of them are old doors, recycled from who knows what. Past life. You can even see the ghost of a hinge scar on one. A bit of thatch droops sadly over one edge. If you squint, you might spot a spider's web stretched elegantly across the corner, trembling every time a fly buzzes by. This, dear traveler, is the countryside privy, the outhouse, the humble heir to every hole in the ground humanity ever scratched out. And for most medieval people, it was the only toilet they'd ever know. Step inside, gingerly, because the floor is just packed earth and slightly suspect. The interior is dark even at midday, lit only by thin slices of sun that squeeze through the gaps in the boards. Dust dances in the beams like tiny golden ghosts. A bench runs along the far side, with 2 or 3 roughly cut holes. Beneath, well, you can imagine. Or better yet, perhaps you'd rather not. There's no perfumed rush here, no trickling chute to whisk things away to some distant moat. Instead, there might be a scattering of straw, or a pile of broad leaves carefully laid to help keep the worst odors tamped down, and to make things a touch more dignified for the next person. Sometimes a farmer would even add a scoop of ash from last night's hearth. It didn't entirely solve the smell problem, but it did help a bit with moisture and pests. Now crouch here with me. Only in imagination, your nose will thank you. Peer through one of the cracks in the wall and see the vegetable garden stretching away in neat rows. Fat cabbages nestle next to trellised peas. Carrots poke their ferny tops up from dark soil. It's almost picturesque until you remember exactly what helped feed those crops. Because here's the straightforward truth. Human waste was valuable, a precious if pungent ingredient in the great cycle of medieval farming. After pits filled up, or before they got truly out of hand, someone in the family, maybe the farmer himself or one of his hardy sons, would dig out the contents and cart it straight to the field. Think of that the next time someone sighs about organic fertilizer. Medieval folk would have nodded vigorously. There's a certain rough poetry to it, though. What came from the earth returned to it. The same carrots that went into last winter's stew might very literally help feed next year's crop. Circle of life. If you don't mind a side of dry heaving, let yourself grin a bit. Because honestly, there's humor here that's hard to resist. Picture the village boasting at market day. Have you seen our turnips this season? Biggest in 3 shires. Aye. Well, must be all that personal attention from your household, eh? A rude joke, sure, but not inaccurate. Now, let your eyes roam around this tiny, drafty hut. Notice the crude graffiti carved into one of the boards, a lopsided heart, maybe someone's initials, or a little dagger scratched with surprising care, likely by a bored farmhand waiting his turn. Even humble privies became canvases of idle thought, places where the mind wandered while the body, well, performed its ordinary business. Lean your hand on the rough plank wall. Feel how the wood gives slightly under your palm, worn smooth in places by countless shoulders brushing past. This spot, humble as it is, might hold more honest humanity than any vaulted cathedral. Here was where life's illusions dropped away, where you were simply a body, doing what bodies must, hoping no one knocked on the door or peeked through a crack with a poorly timed joke. Imagine being a child sent out here after supper, the dark pressing in, owls calling from the wood, every rustle of grass a potential goblin or ghost. You'd hurry, sure you'd glimpsed glowing eyes, then burst back into the warmth of the cottage, breathless, met by your mother's indulgent chuckle as she ladled out another portion of barley porridge. Or picture an old man, knees creaky, taking his slow, careful seat with a sigh. Maybe he leans back, tilts his face toward the slit in the boards that shows a slice of moon. Maybe he murmurs a half prayer, half grumble for his aching bones, his troublesome belly, his grandsons who keep forgetting to spread fresh straw. All of it so prosaic, so necessary, so tender in its own unsung way. Now step back outside, into the cleaner air. Take a long breath. Smell wood smoke curling up from the cottage chimney. The sharper scent of fresh-cut grass where someone scythed a patch for the goats. Listen to the little domestic orchestra around you. A door banging open, a woman's voice calling for her husband to fetch more wood, a pig grunting contentedly as it roots through scraps. Life here didn't shy away from mess. If anything, it folded it right into daily rhythms. You composted what you could, swept out what you couldn't, rinsed your hands in the trough, and went right back to living. And isn't that oddly admirable? These people didn't pretend to be above their own biology. They acknowledged it, managed it, sometimes even joked about it. A medieval farmer might scratch his beard, grin, and say, "Well, if my carrots grow fat, it's thanks to our family's fine contributions." Then slap his knee and laugh. Meanwhile, over in the manor house, a dainty lady might powder her nose and pretend her dainty nose couldn't possibly be involved in such earthy cycles. And all the while, her garden, too, would be quietly soaking up exactly the same rustic generosity, just through the hands of paid laborers who did the dirty work out of sight. Let your mind drift for a moment, because it's a funny old world. The grand and the humble weren't really so far apart. Everyone returned something to the soil eventually. The peasants just did it with fewer illusions. Now wander with me past the garden, down a little lane where cart ruts fill with rainwater. A goose stands in one, delicately sipping from what is quite possibly a mixture of yesterday's storm and yesterday's chamber pot. Nature isn't squeamish. Why should she be? She's busy recycling everything, turning rot into root, refuse into daisies. Let yourself smile again, because there's a curious comfort in how matter-of-fact medieval life was. No one wrote solemn poems about the privy, well, almost no one. Some delightfully crude ballads did survive, but everyone understood its place in the grand scheme. Eat, enjoy, excrete, enrich the earth, repeat. Now close your eyes for a second, just to let your other senses catch up. Feel the soft clump of dirt under your boots, the breeze that smells of cut hay and distant cook fires. Hear the lowing of a cow, the creak of a well pulley, the quiet tick of your own heartbeat, slowing to match this easy countryside pace. Because even here, behind a half-falling down outhouse that would make your modern plumber faint dead away, there's something beautifully grounded. This was life, stripped of pomp, tucked right up against the edge of the soil that fed it. Messy, unpretentious, absolutely essential. We'll wander next into the surprising places where people did chase a bit of luxury. Public bathhouses with steamy tubs and scandalous laughter. But linger here with me for just a heartbeat more. Let your shoulders drop. Let a grin tug at your mouth. Because if medieval peasants could greet each morning with a stretch, a rude joke, and a cheerful acceptance of the day's chores, privy included, then surely we can face our own little discomforts with a touch more grace. So stand here in the soft evening light. Chickens fussing, children somewhere beyond sight, daring each other to peek into the nettles. Feel the tender pulse of this simple world, and know that even if the toilet was nothing but a hole lined with last season's straw, it was also the starting point for tomorrow's feast. A rude miracle, a smelly blessing, the quiet, grinning heart of daily life. And somehow, doesn't that make it all the more lovable? So after all that delightful chatter about privies, castle garderobes that dangled you over oblivion, village outhouses with straw politely rearranged by the chickens, maybe your modern sensibilities are squirming a bit. Maybe you're lying there in your soft bed right now, clutching your blanket a little tighter, thinking, all right, sure, they knew how to poop, but didn't medieval people just never wash? Wasn't it basically centuries of unwashed bodies, crusty tunics and fleas, square dancing in their hair? Ah, my dear skeptical time traveler, what a delicious little myth for us to poke holes in, because the real story is far more interesting, more colorful, and occasionally downright steamy. Let's start by framing the question the way a medieval person might have. Why wouldn't we wash? Why wouldn't we love warm water and the clean, tingly feeling of skin scrubbed free of yesterday's sweat and grime? Because, for much of medieval Europe, especially in the earlier periods, bathing wasn't rare, it was relished. It was a pleasure, a social ritual, and even, in some places, a bit of a civic duty. Imagine yourself now, not in a drafty castle or by a peasant's privy, but standing at the edge of a bustling medieval town square. The sun is out, turning roof tiles into warm little jewels. Merchants shout about onions and salted herring. Dogs snatch at dropped crusts. Children dart under carts. And there, just off the main thoroughfare, is a broad timber building with wide doors thrown open to let the fragrant steam spill out. Step inside. Feel that rush of humid air greet you like a happy slap. It smells of soap, rough, handmade bars heavy on lye, maybe perfumed faintly with crushed rosemary. It smells also of damp wood and warm flesh, because this is a stubby, an old English term for bathhouse, or a badstube if you'd wandered over to the German lands, or a balnay if you preferred your Latin. Whatever you called it, it was essentially the same idea, a place for people to come together, strip down, and get clean. Pause here. Isn't that a little scandalous already? The thought of so many bodies, different ages, different shapes, shoulder to shoulder in the same bathhouse. Some might shyly clutch towels around them. Others, less bothered, would stand quite bare, scrubbing vigorously at armpits or laughing as they sluiced water over each other's backs. Privacy was often minimal, just a few wooden screens or cloth drapes if you were lucky. But for all that, there was surprisingly little awkwardness, because bathing was so normal, so baked into the social rhythm of life. Lean against the wall a second, close your eyes, and listen. Hear the chatter drifting over splashes, the clink of wooden buckets being dipped and poured. Somewhere a woman is telling a long story about how her neighbor's rooster keeps sneaking into her garden. A man retorts with a dirty joke that makes a cluster of bathers laugh and slap the water, sending little waves dancing across the room. This was hygiene, sure, but it was also community, a weekly or bi-weekly, or even daily chance, if your town was prosperous enough, to catch up on gossip, exchange news, broker small deals. Children squealed and raced from tub to tub. Older folks sat with sighs of relief, letting sore muscles soak. And this wasn't just for peasants or middle-tier merchants. Wealthier citizens used bathhouses too, though sometimes they might rent a private room or pay extra for scented waters and discreet attendants who'd scrub them down with soft cloths. Now let your imagination zoom in on the bath itself. It's not always a single big pool. Often it was a cluster of large wooden tubs, each about the size of a generous wine barrel, laid on its side, filled by servants carrying steaming buckets from great copper kettles set on fires in adjoining rooms. The wood is dark from years of use, the rims smooth from countless hands gripping them for balance. Steam clings to the beams overhead like gentle ghosts. You slip into one of these tubs, and instantly your skin tingles. Hot water envelops you, seeping into every tight shoulder, coaxing sighs out of muscles you didn't know were clenched. Maybe someone scattered petals across the surface, rose or marigold, just for the pretty smell. Or perhaps they've tossed in a handful of pungent mint, sharp enough to tickle your sinuses. You lean your head back, let the warm water lap at your ears. And it's here, in this communal warmth, that the notion of medieval filth starts to unravel a bit. Because people liked bathing, they paid for it, they looked forward to it. Many towns had regulations requiring bathhouses to maintain fresh water, or forbidding unscrupulous owners from reusing too much without topping it up. It was an industry, complete with health ordinances, posted hours, and occasionally even musical entertainment, wandering fiddlers or singers who'd earn a few coins from bathers, pleased by a tune while they soaked. Was it always pristine? Oh, absolutely not. By modern standards, it could get pretty dicey, especially when the water was changed infrequently on busy days. But it was still far from the popular image of medieval people, terrified of touching water. In fact, for centuries, they were more afraid of not bathing, believing it opened the body to sickness. Skin needed to be kept clean so the pores could breathe properly, or so many medieval medical tracts claimed. Walk with me a bit deeper into this steamy hall. Notice a young boy scrubbing his grandfather's back with a coarse linen cloth, both of them giggling every time the old man flinches at a ticklish spot. A pair of merchants sit nearby in tubs, side by side, talking softly about wool prices and whether the next fair will draw enough buyers from the coast. It's all so wonderfully mundane, a gentle tangle of business, family life, health, and simple pleasure. So how did we get the idea that medieval people were allergic to soap and water? Partly because by the late Middle Ages, especially after waves of plague swept across Europe, attitudes did start to shift. Some doctors began warning that hot water opened the skin to bad airs, the dreaded miasma thought to carry disease. Better, they reasoned, to stay a bit grubby and keep those pores sealed tight. A strange, tragic misstep in public health history, and one that did indeed lead to periods when folk bathed far less. But that was a later chapter, tangled up with fear. The earlier, longer-running tradition was one of tubs and chatter, scented herbs, and steam curling around friendly voices. So next time you hear someone snort about how people back then only bathed once a year, let your mind wander right back here. Picture these bustling bathhouses, water sloshing over rims, warm air buzzing with laughter. Remember that even in the grittiest times, people still craved the comfort of warmth, the small luxury of a clean skin, the tender joy of sharing a space where bodies, yes, sometimes a bit imperfect, sometimes wrinkled or knobbly or scarred, could simply exist together without shame. Let yourself sink a little deeper into this imaginary tub. Feel how your muscles unfurl, how even your scalp loosens under the gentle heat. Hear a lute strumming somewhere beyond the next partition, joined by a woman's low voice singing a tune about the moon rising over the barley fields. And grin, just a bit, because isn't it lovely to realize the past was not all dirt and gloom, but full of human beings who enjoyed exactly the same small, steamy pleasures that you would after a long day. We'll wander on soon, slipping into even more playful territory. Public bathhouses that weren't always so innocent, where the warmth sometimes led to blushes for reasons having very little to do with water temperature. But for now, close your eyes here. Let your breathing slow to match the gentle ripples lapping against the tub's wooden walls. Feel the centuries thin around you until it's just your contented sigh mingling with 1,000 others across time, all glad simply to be clean, warm, and deliciously at ease. So you're still there, aren't you? Lolling lazily in that wide, dark tub, the warm water sighing around your shoulders. Let it swirl, let it hold you, because we're not quite ready to leave this simple medieval luxury. Imagine it more closely now, not in a bustling town bathhouse, crowded with chatter and dripping elbows, but in the smaller, softer privacy of a manor, or even a well-to-do farmhouse on bath night. It all starts hours before. The hearth is stoked high, iron pots of water set to bubble and spit. The fire snaps and sends up sparks that vanish into the sooty gloom above the chimney. Someone, maybe a stout servant with rolled sleeves, maybe your own weary spouse, stoops to add another armful of logs. The wood hisses where sap still hides in green pockets, releasing a ghost of pine. Beside the hearth stands the tub itself, a broad iron-hooped barrel, taller than your knees, wide enough to stretch out if you curl your legs just so. The inside bears the subtle sheen of old soap, the ghost of countless previous baths. As each pot reaches a rolling boil, it's lugged carefully, with muttered prayers to avoid splashing over to the tub and poured in. The water hits the cold metal or wood with a low, hungry sigh. Steam billows up, wreathing the face of whoever's pouring, wrapping them in a brief, fragrant shroud. Back they go for another pot and another until the tub is half full of swirling heat. Meanwhile, a smaller bucket of cooler water waits nearby. Once the big kettle chores are done, it's used to temper the bath to something that won't turn your toes lobster red. Someone tests it with a cautious knuckle, then with the flat of a hand, stirring little eddies, a slow smile. Perfect. Now it's your turn. Step close. Feel how the heat radiates off the tub in gentle waves, prickling your shins, tightening your calves. Your breath fogs faintly in the air, mingling with the ribbons of steam that drift lazily ceilingward. Slip out of your tunic or gown or whatever your dreaming mind has dressed you in tonight. Let it puddle around your ankles, then carefully step in. The water embraces your feet first, making them tingle from the sudden contrast to the cool floor. It's so warm, it almost aches. Then your ankles, your shins, the tender crooks of your knees sink lower still, gripping the rim as the heat climbs your thighs, your belly, finally your chest. Goosebumps flash up your arms, only to smooth away as the water covers you. Now lean back, rest your head against the tub's edge, exhale in one long, decadent stream. Because here it is, the rare quiet of your own private bath. Someone's thought ahead. They've scattered sprigs of rosemary or thyme into the water. Little green leaves swirl past your skin, bump your shoulder, then spin away like shy dancers. Maybe there are a few pale rose petals floating languidly, their faint perfume rising only when the steam lifts it. On a low stool nearby, a single candle stands guard. Its flame flutters whenever the draft sneaks under the door, sending quick little shivers of light skipping across the tub's surface. Those reflections climb the wall behind you, ripple along the beams overhead, turn everything into a living painting. Listen, you might hear distant voices in the hall, someone laughing over a spilled cup, the scrape of a stool. But in here, the water muffles the world. Each small sound is softened, as if your ears have been wrapped in velvet. The water itself whispers around you, little pops of tiny bubbles escaping the cracks in the tub's wood. When you shift your legs, it gives a low sigh, lapping against your chest. Now run your hands slowly over your skin. Feel the prickle of old sweat and dust loosen and wash away. Let your fingers comb through your hair, heavy and warm as water trickles between the strands. This is no rushed morning splash at the basin. It's an unhurried surrender to heat, a rare moment when your body is purely your own, safe, soothed, drifting. And doesn't it seem decadent, almost sinful, in a small, lovely way? Of course, it's easy to forget all the work that went into this modest luxury, because while you lie here sighing and tracing lazy circles through rosemary leaves, remember someone spent hours hauling bucket after bucket from the hearth. Someone chopped the wood that fed the fire. Someone scrubbed the tub last time, so you wouldn't sink into the ghosts of last week's grime. A medieval bath was never just a turn of a faucet away. It was a team effort, a plan often made days in advance, which meant when bath day came, it was special, a treat, something to look forward to. Maybe like how you savor that long shower after a sweaty hike or a candlelit soak on a chilly evening. Now glance at the candle again. See how it pools its gold along the water's surface. Dip your hand and watch the ripples slice that reflection into quicksilver ribbons. A few drops escape your wrist, run down your arm, and tickle your ribs before joining the bath again. You let out a breath that's half chuckle, half dreamy sigh, because you're starting to appreciate just how much this moment mattered. Not just for cleanliness, though that was no small joy, freeing your pores of itch, letting skin breathe after days bundled under wool and linen, but for spirit too, for sheer human pleasure. And while it might sound quaint to us, medieval people understood the way a good soak could heal. Monastic infirmaries often had dedicated baths for the sick. Doctors wrote approvingly of warm water easing melancholy humors, smoothing the fretful mind. A loving wife might brew a pot of mint infusion to pour over her husband's shoulders after a long day in the fields, humming a small tune to mask her worry about the cough he's picked up. Lean your head back again. Close your eyes. Let the warmth creep all the way into your scalp, loosening that spot that always seems to hold your worry. Outside this little bathing room, the castle or cottage still hums along. Dogs barking, carts rolling over cobbles, children squabbling over a wooden toy. But in here, the only kingdom is yours, shared perhaps with a dancing flame and a few drifting petals. Stay here as long as you like, because soon enough the water will cool, the chill will creep back under the door, and someone will knock softly to ask if you're finished, ready to pour the water out into the yard, or carry it to the garden where it might feed the herbs that will scent next week's bath. And oh, when you step out, the air will nip at your damp skin, turning each little droplet into a tiny cold kiss. Someone will wrap a rough towel around your shoulders. Scratchy, yes, but also warm from waiting by the hearth. You'll shiver, laugh, maybe scold them playfully for taking so long. But you'll also breathe deep. Smell the faint rosemary on your arms, the ghost of wood smoke in your hair. Feel clean, feel renewed. So next time anyone tells you that medieval folk never bathed, that they trundled through life wrapped in layers of sweat and barnyard, invite them here, into this slow, steamy memory. Let them lean over the edge of the tub, watch the candle waver, see the way your hand skims under the surface and sends little sunlit tremors across your chest. Ask them, lightly, would you give this up? This moment of heat, quiet, and softness, because chances are they'd sigh just as you did, letting their modern worries slip under the surface like tiny, forgotten pebbles. We'll wander next into more communal waters, public bathhouses that promised everything from music to scandal, but for now, linger here. Let your breathing slow, match the tiny rise and fall of the bath. Let yourself be held, because for all its drafty walls and inconvenient wood chopping, this little moment is as close to timeless bliss as anything you'll find in any age. So you've just peeled yourself out of that solitary wooden tub, skin pink and loose with pleasure, hair damp and fragrant from floating herbs. You've wrapped up in a thick, slightly scratchy linen towel and drifted near the hearth to finish drying off, maybe with a mug of warm spiced ale in your hands. But now, step with me out of your private little chamber, because we're about to open the door to something far livelier. Imagine a bustling medieval town again, its narrow streets cluttered with carts and baskets, its taverns leaking laughter and fiddle music into the evening air. Push past a few shouting vendors, hawking pies and salted herring, and there, tucked along a quieter side lane, is a long timber building. Lanterns hang above the door, painting swirls of gold across muddy stones. Through the cracks around the door wafts a damp, musky, wonderfully warm smell. Welcome to the public bathhouse. Step inside. The air hits you immediately. Soft, wet, fragrant with soap and steamy skin. You blink as the moisture fogs your lashes. Sounds wash over you in layers. Laughter splashing. The clink of wooden cups. Someone tuning a lute in the corner. A wave of giggles erupts behind a modest linen partition, followed by a sharp splash and a squeal that says someone probably just got dunked. Here, bathing isn't just hygiene. It's social life. It's recreation. It's half tavern, half spa, half, well, sometimes something even racier. Pause for a second near the wall. Take it all in. A series of large wooden tubs lines the room, each surrounded by small benches and low tables heaped with food, platters of bread and cheese, dishes of salted nuts, bowls of apples. Bath attendants move back and forth, carrying heavy buckets from the hearth at the far end, topping off each tub so it stays delightfully hot. Lean over one of the tubs. The water is dark with swirling herbs, little green bits clinging to the sides, leaves that look suspiciously like sage or marjoram. The surface dances with candlelight, tiny bright gold smears that shatter whenever someone moves an arm. And oh, do they move? Because people here aren't just soaking quietly. They're talking, gesturing, teasing each other, raising cups of ale and toasts. A trio of younger men leans over the edge of their tub, deep in conspiratorial chatter, while a pair of older women perched on a bench swap gossip that makes them both cackle so hard they nearly lose their balance. Further along, someone's brought a small harp and strums it lazily, half-heartedly, in between bites of a meat pie. The tune floats over to where a boy helps his grandmother wash her hair, carefully pouring water down so it doesn't get in her eyes. It's a scene that feels shockingly modern, doesn't it? Swap the wood beams for tile and the tunics for bikinis, and you could just as easily be standing in a trendy rooftop hot tub somewhere in the city. Same laughter, same careful flirtations, same easy indulgence in warm water and warm company. Now, because we're friends, and because you've stayed this long by my fire, I'll lean in and whisper a slightly naughtier truth. These bathhouses weren't always places of pure scrub-a-dub virtue. By the later Middle Ages, many towns had reputations that were, let's say, spicy. Public baths often doubled as informal meeting spots for lovers, or as places where business deals, sealed with steamy handshakes and probably a fair bit of skin on display, could drift into flirtations that didn't always stay innocent. Imagine it. Music playing softly, warm water loosening every tense shoulder, every stiff reserve, a jug of honeyed wine passed around, laughter growing just a bit too loud, eyes lingering, a hand brushing someone's shoulder under the water, then staying there a moment too long. It's not hard to see why the local preachers sometimes railed against bathhouses as dens of temptation, but it's also not hard to see why people kept coming anyway. After all, life was short, uncertain, often hard. Why wouldn't you steal a little luxury, maybe even a little scandal, while you could? Drift with me along the edge of the room. Notice how someone's brought out a platter of small pastries, their flaky tops glossy with melted butter. A girl with wet curls sticking to her cheeks reaches for one, giggles as a boy beside her tries to snatch it first. Their knees knock under the water, sending ripples across to where an elderly man leans back, eyes half closed in a dozy grin, soaking up the heat like a sun-fat cat. And yes, sometimes things got more explicit than stolen pastries. Chronicles from places like Southwark in medieval London or certain raucous corners of German towns hint at bathhouses doubling as places where sex was as available as soap. There were even rules posted outside, regulations about who could enter, whether food and drink could be sold inside, and stern threats of fines if things got too rowdy. Did it stop people? Of course not. Humans have been ignoring such signs with cheerful creativity since the dawn of written language. But for all that mischief, most people simply came for the joy of warm water, friendly chatter, maybe a gentle song floating through steam. Imagine the comfort on a cold, damp evening, shoulders stiff from hauling barrels or bending over looms, of sliding into a tub already half full of neighbors, laughing over whose rooster escaped into the ale barrels last market day. Lean your head back against the damp wooden post. Feel how it's slightly sticky with old steam, perfumed by countless herbs that have soaked in this room over the years. Listen as a low tune starts again on that harp, joined by a breathy flute someone pulls from their belt. The notes swirl up into the rafters, tangling with tendrils of mist. It's deeply, tenderly human, not pristine, no sterile chlorine sparkle here, but so very alive. Now grin with me at this delicious irony. While modern people sometimes imagine medieval folk as mud-caked trolls terrified of water, the reality is they often spent more time in warm baths, laughing, eating, flirting, than many of us squeezed into hurried showers between work emails. And doesn't it make perfect sense? In a world of hard labor and colder beds, a shared bathhouse became the nightclub, the cafe, the spa day all rolled into one. You might leave with a cleaner scalp, a heart slightly lighter from gossip, maybe even a blush if someone's smile lingered a bit too long. Of course, sooner or later, the candles burned low, the water cooled, someone would pour out the dregs, often onto nearby gardens, because why waste all that rich if faintly soapy brew? You'd climb out, skin flushed, hair dripping down your back, wrap yourself in a coarse towel. Maybe you'd shiver a little as you stepped into the cool night air, only for the next warm breath of wind to feel like an embrace. Home you'd go, footsteps soft on the cobbles. Tomorrow might bring frost or rain or another round of plague rumors, but tonight you'd slide into bed with clean skin, cheeks still pink from laughter, your mind humming with little melodies picked up among the tubs. We'll wander next into the surprising reversal of fortune these baths suffered, how fear of disease turned water from friend to suspected enemy, sending people right back into layers of scented linen instead. But for now, stay here with me. Feel the gentle press of steam against your face. Hear the low murmur of voices wrapped around you like a blanket. And maybe, just maybe, let your imagination blush a tiny bit, thinking of all the stolen glances and tender conspiracies these warm waters once witnessed. Because sometimes, in every age, a bit of heat has nothing to do with the temperature of the bath. Isn't it funny? Just a moment ago, you were happily lounging in a steamy medieval bathhouse, water lapping at your collarbones, lute music trickling through the fog, your nose full of sweet herbs, and maybe a faint whiff of bread from a platter passed nearby. But now, drift forward a century or two. Step carefully, because the mood changes. The same door you pushed open before, spilling out fragrant clouds and bright laughter, might now stand closed. The bathhouse windows shuttered. Inside, if you dare peek, the tubs sit dry, gathering dust. The hearth where water once boiled, now home to only cold ashes. Why? What happened to all that joyful splashing? In a word, fear. Or if we're being more precise, a very medieval misunderstanding of how disease worked. Let's set the stage. By the mid to late 14th century, Europe had been battered again and again by the plague. The Great Mortality, what you might call the Black Death, swept through towns and villages like some grim, unstoppable rumor, leaving streets eerily quiet and hearths cold. Entire families vanished in weeks. Gravediggers couldn't keep up. Church bells rang so often for funerals, they might as well have stayed tolling day and night. And in the panicked, desperate search for answers, people clutched at the medical wisdom of the time, some of which was beautifully wrong. The leading theory back then, that plague was carried by miasma, or bad air, often rising from rotting matter or drifting through towns on foul winds. Doctors believed that your body's defenses lay mostly in your skin, specifically in your pores, those tiny invisible gates that could swing wide open when you got too warm. Now think about that. A lovely, steamy bath that opened your pores was suddenly seen not as a luxury or a tonic for the spirits, but as a dangerous gamble, because once those pores gaped wide, who knew what nasty plague-laden air might slip inside? Imagine a bustling medieval town square, where once people might have waved cheerily to neighbors on their way to the stubby. Now you see uneasy glances instead, fewer people carrying towels under their arms, bathhouse keepers scratching their heads, then locking their doors. Of course, not everyone gave up bathing overnight, but enough fear spread that across many regions of Europe, the frequency of public bathing dwindled. Nobles, who once held court in hot tubs, now retreated to dry rooms layered in thick fabrics. Peasants, who'd saved coins for the rare treat of a shared tub, started to wonder if it was worth the risk. And isn't it ironically tragic? Precisely when people needed more thorough cleaning, when a decent scrub might at least have discouraged some of the fleas that carried Yersinia pestis, they backed away from water. A dark little medieval joke, really. Want to stay healthy? Better skip the bath. A bit of dirt will keep your skin sealed tight. Absolutely upside-down logic by modern standards. And yet, to them, it made all the terrifying sense in the world. Lean your shoulder against the cold stone of a wall now. Breathe in that slightly musty scent of old mortar. Picture a young merchant's wife sitting on the edge of her bed, combing out her hair with quick, nervous strokes. She's wrapped in layer upon layer of linen, partly for warmth, partly because linen was thought to draw out impurities. Better to change underclothes often than risk opening the skin with hot water. She frowns at a small stain on her shift, then reaches for a lavender sachet to tuck into her bodice. Perhaps she sniffs it twice, hoping the strong, sweet scent will crowd out any lurking miasma. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she half wonders whether skipping her usual bath was wise. Her scalp itches, her arms feel sticky, but then she remembers the stories of neighbors who visited the baths, returned home flushed and clean, only to wake 2 days later with lumps under their arms and death whispering at the door. So she stays dry. She dabs rose water on her wrists, pulls her sleeves down, and mutters a prayer that her pores stay safely sealed. It wasn't just ordinary folk who bought into this thinking. Even royal courts began to avoid bathing beyond quick, targeted washes of hands, faces, and the more urgent spots. They leaned harder on perfumes, on scented gloves, on fresh shifts changed daily. That was the new path to cleanliness, or so they hoped. Step with me now into a grand chamber in a minor French chateau. Tapestries hang thick on the walls, trying valiantly to block the cold. A young nobleman stands with one foot on a cushioned stool, while a servant powders his calves with a cloth dipped in vinegar and crushed violets. A gentle scent rises, masking the sharper tang of sweat. He puffs out his chest proudly. Better this than the bath, he murmurs. The physician says the plague loves open pores. His manservant nods solemnly. Inside, he might be longing for a good soak himself, but he wouldn't dare suggest it, not with so many rumors swirling like dark crows above the rooftops. Isn't it a bit heartbreakingly absurd that such fear twisted a once joyful communal ritual into a shadow of suspicion? Imagine telling the folks who once crowded into bathhouses for music, gossip, and a pleasant simmer that their beloved pastime had become, in polite circles, practically taboo. And yet, here's the curious thing. While towns shuttered their public baths and nobles doused themselves in rosewater instead of steam, ordinary daily grime didn't just vanish. People still sweated through hard labor, still stumbled home muddy from fields or dusty from roads. They simply found new ways, some clever, some comically misguided, to cope. Because fear might close a bathhouse, but it couldn't quite kill the human craving to feel clean, or at least to smell like you might be. We'll explore all those clever perfumes, sachets, scented pomanders, and layered linen shifts in a little while. But for now, stand here with me in this shifting doorway between two medieval worlds, one that loved to bathe and another that suddenly flinched at warm water. Feel how strange the air seems, how it carries both the echo of laughter from old bathhouses and the tense hush of households pulling curtains tight, trying to keep out the invisible breath of plague. And let it spark a small, wry smile, because centuries later, we're still wrestling with odd ideas about what makes us truly healthy, still bouncing between obsession and fear, between soap ads promising immortality and folks who side-eye every sneeze. So rest your shoulder against the stone a little longer. Feel how cool it is, how solid. Let your breathing slow again. Because even in the midst of this curious medieval tug-of-war over baths, there were still gentle moments, mothers wiping children's faces with damp cloths, sweethearts playfully dabbing each other with sprigs dipped in scented water, old soldiers soaking tired feet in small basins by the hearth. Fear might have chased away the communal tub, but it couldn't quite smother that tender human urge to be soothed by warmth and water, or to share it, quietly, with someone we trusted enough to lean close. We'll wander next into that, into sachets stuffed with lavender, gowns spritzed with rose oil, clever ways people tried to keep sweet and safe when long baths were out of favor. But for now, just lean here with me. Let your thoughts meander. Let them curl around the funny, tragic notion that in trying so hard to shut their pores, medieval folk might have left the door wide open for other troubles. Because history is deliciously tangled like that, full of ironic lessons and tender small truths that linger, warm as breath, across even the coldest stone walls. So with bathhouses falling eerily quiet, shutters drawn tight against the feared breath of plague, what was a stylish medieval noble to do? After all, they still had dinners to attend, alliances to cement, marriages to negotiate. They couldn't exactly show up smelling like the stable. And thus bloomed a glorious new chapter in the long, fragrant story of human ingenuity. Imagine stepping into a noblewoman's chamber in the late Middle Ages. A tall window lets in weak light through horn panes, dust motes dancing in lazy eddies. Near the bed stands a carved wooden chest, its hinges groaning faintly as a maid lifts the heavy lid. Now lean closer, take a slow, indulgent breath. The inside of that chest breathes out a scent that's rich, complicated, layered like the folds of the gowns inside. There's rose, certainly, soft and powdery, a curl of musk, darker and almost animal. Under that, something a bit sharper, juniper berries crushed underfoot perhaps, and just at the edges, the faint sour-sweet tang of wood that's lived through a few damp seasons too many. Because yes, those magnificent velvet or brocade gowns were stored with little sachets, bundles of linen stuffed with dried lavender, thyme, crushed cloves. Sometimes they tucked in bits of orris root, which smells a bit like dusty violets, or slices of apple studded with cinnamon. It wasn't only to make the dresses smell divine, it was to keep moths and fleas at bay, discourage mildew, and project an aura of luxury that practically strutted ahead of them into any hall. Step closer to the wardrobe. Picture running your hand over one of those sachets. The cloth is rough, a bit stained from countless refills of pungent herbs. If you press it between your palms, it releases a little ghost of scent, so strong it makes your eyes water. And it wasn't just wardrobes. People wore these scents quite literally on their sleeves, tiny pomanders, hollow metal balls pierced with intricate designs, dangled from belts or from long chains draped around necks. Inside might be stuffed waxed balls of resin, ambergris, crushed flowers, or spices imported at great expense from far-off markets. Imagine walking behind a lady as she sweeps through a corridor. Her gown stirs the air, and what you smell isn't sweat or old wool, but a peculiar swirl of rose oil, warm skin, and the faint salty tang of the sea that still clung to that little lump of ambergris. It was a fragrant halo that broadcast her wealth before she even spoke. Men were just as fond of these scented contrivances. A fashionable lord might pay through the nose, quite literally, for gloves soaked in civet or musk. They'd hold them to their faces when passing through crowds, believing the strong perfume protected them from disease, and conveniently from the robust reality of hundreds of unwashed bodies packed together on market day. But beyond the little scented curios, there was also the humble hero of medieval cleanliness, linen. Run your hand along the edge of a lady's camise, that fine underlayer worn right next to the skin. Linen was smooth, surprisingly cool, easily laundered even if true soap was expensive, and many peasants relied on ashlie instead. Nobles often wore 2, 3, even 4 layers of fine linen beneath their outer garments. Why? Because changing linen shifts frequently was believed to draw off impurities. No need to dunk your whole body in risky warm water if you could simply peel away the layer that had soaked up yesterday's sweat and suspicious bodily exhalations. It was a clever halfway approach to hygiene, half superstition, half genuine practicality, because while they didn't know about bacteria, medieval folk did observe that frequent linen changes left them feeling fresher, itching less, and kept their fancy outer clothes from smelling too enthusiastic. Now, lean your head close to that open wardrobe again. Inhale that swirl of rose, musk, lavender, faint mold. Try to imagine living surrounded by such scents, not just in your gowns, but in your sheets, your hair, which you might sprinkle with a scented powder, even the wax that sealed your letters. It's oddly intoxicating, a little decadent, a little claustrophobic, like the inside of a travel chest stuffed with old love letters and dried orange peels. And while it was certainly better than the pure ripe funk of never-washed wool, there's also something a touch desperate about it. A world that once frolicked in steamy public baths now retreated into layers of fabric, sachets tucked at every vulnerable pulse point, hoping that if they smelled sweet enough, sickness would swerve politely around them. So, isn't it quietly funny, maybe even a bit sad, that in their frantic perfume rituals, they might have missed the simpler comfort of soap, water, and a good scouring brush? But don't feel too smug. Lean back from the wardrobe, close your eyes, and imagine how we might smell to them. 1,000 little chemical scents, plastic off-gassing from your phone case, laundry pods promising ocean breezes, the faint static fizz of synthetic fibers. In a way, your closet is probably just as weird and complicated, just a different kind of alchemy. So give those sachets and pomanders a moment of amused respect. They were doing their best in the only ways they knew how to stay safe, sweet, and maybe just a little bit seductive. Now step softly out of this scented chamber, because we're about to take a playful turn past the perfumed nobility and toward the sunburnt farmers outside the manor walls, who despite all appearances might just have been cleaner in some very down-to-earth ways. But we'll wander there gently. Let the ghost of lavender cling to your sleeve a moment longer and breathe it in with a slow smile. Because for all the slightly desperate excess, there was also something lovely about the way they wrapped their bodies in blossoms and spice, a small fragrant rebellion against fear and filth, a little human triumph that still lingers in every bar of lavender soap you tuck into your own drawer today. Isn't that strangely comforting? The thought that across the centuries, people were always reaching for petals and herbs, hoping to make their fragile days smell just a bit more like paradise. So let's step carefully down the wide stone steps of the manor house, duck under the low gate arch, nod politely to the watchman, who barely glances up from gnawing his bit of cheese, and wander out into the bright, honest air of the countryside. And oh, take a long breath here. It's different out in the fields, isn't it? Gone is that heady swirl of rosewater, musk, moldy cedar chests. Instead, the breeze carries simpler fragrances, crushed grass underfoot, a sun-warmed animal somewhere nearby, the faint sparkle of wood smoke rising from cottage chimneys, a far cry from the dark perfume cabinets of the nobles. Stroll with me a little farther, past neat vegetable plots where bean poles stand like skinny sentinels. Here comes a farmer, broad-shouldered and ruddy from days under the open sky. His tunic is plain, belted at the waist, linen shirt peeking from beneath, no velvet, no gold thread, not even a fancy badge to mark allegiance to some minor lord. He pauses to straighten up, wiping sweat from his brow with a forearm that smells not of cloves or ambergris, but simply of salt and sun. His chest rises and falls with an easy rhythm. He's breathing hard, sure, but it's the breath of someone whose pores are busy doing what pores were meant to do, clearing out the day's heat without the panic of a perfumed handkerchief fluttering anxiously over every exhale. And here's the funny little secret medieval life never bothered to hide. Sometimes that humble farmer was cleaner, in the simplest, truest sense, than the lord cloaked in furs inside the manor. Because while nobles fretted over keeping their linen shifts impeccably white, layer upon layer to sop up sweat rather than wash it away, the farmer had a more direct approach. When he finished working, hauling sacks of barley, mending fences, chasing that one goat that always found the gap in the hedge, he might strip to his braes and splash himself at the well, sluicing cold water over arms and neck. Or he might step into a shallow stream that cut across the meadow, wading in up to his calves, bending to rinse hands still sticky from mending leather harness. The water's chilly bite would make him suck in his breath, then sigh with relief. Sometimes he'd even scrub himself roughly with a fistful of clean grass or a handful of mint plucked from the bank, nature's own scouring pad and aftershave all in one. Picture that for a moment. The sun warm on his shoulders, water trickling down in little bright rivulets, cutting lines through dust and sweat, pooling around his feet. A bird calls overhead. Somewhere across the field, his wife laughs as she shoos a goose from her garden patch. It's not sophisticated. It's certainly not perfumed, but it's clean. And while the old Duke up in the drafty hall might be draping himself in perfumed ermine and ordering another spritz of clove water, this sturdy fellow's skin is simply fresh from the well, tingling from a brisk rub-down, pores content, hair smelling faintly of river stones and sun. It makes you smile, doesn't it? Because for all the aristocratic fuss about elaborate hygiene rituals, layers of linen, sachets dangling from silk belts, hands dabbed with rose vinegar, sometimes the peasant's straightforward splash and scrub was far more effective. Think of it as medieval dry humor played out in sweat and soap, or the lack thereof. Who'd you rather cozy up to by the fire tonight? The perfumed old baron with musk caked into every pleat of his brocade, or the farm lad whose shoulders still steam a bit from his last dip in the stream? You might surprise yourself with your answer, but it's more than just a joke. It's a gentle lesson in how class didn't always line up with comfort, or even simple bodily pleasantness. The farmer's daily grime was washed away by honest water. The nobles might only be masked by costly spices, never quite removed, lurking like an uninvited dinner guest under all that fragrance. Pause a moment by the well, run your hand over the stone edge, feel where countless fingers have smoothed it over years of hauling buckets. Listen to the faint drip of water that didn't quite make it into a pail, trickling back down the mossy side. Now picture a handful of children racing up with wooden cups, each elbowing the next, splashing more on their tunics than into their mouths. They're giggling, wiping their faces on sleeves, probably dirtier than when they arrived. But still there's something wholesome in it, isn't there? A mess that's just part of life, soon to be washed off in another playful tumble through the shallows. Meanwhile, back in that grand hall, the Countess might be fanning herself delicately, hoping no one notices the slightly sour edge creeping up beneath her violet sachet. Isn't it deliciously ironic that all her meticulous precautions, the money poured into rose petals and imported sandalwood oil, might leave her only fractionally more fragrant, if at all, than the sun-baked farmhand who gave himself a quick rinse with mint leaves? So here, by this village well, or slow-winding brook, take a deep breath, smell the fresh water, the cool stone, the crushed grass under your feet. Let it fill your lungs in a way that musk and civet never could. Because while history loves to paint peasants as perpetually filthy, the truth, like so many medieval truths, is far more tangled. Yes, they sweated hard. Yes, they sometimes went days without a full dunk. But they also washed in streams, wiped themselves down with damp cloths after harvest, even used simple herbal brews to freshen underarms or sore feet. And more importantly, they moved. Their blood pumped, their skin flushed, their bodies aired out under tunics far less suffocating than the velvet prisons of the nobility. So next time you picture medieval hygiene as strictly a game for perfumed elites, spare a little affectionate chuckle for the village strongman who might have been the cleaner, better-smelling option to sit next to at supper. Because under all that rustic simplicity was a kind of earthy health, a glow that didn't come from rose oil, but from hours in fresh air, calloused hands dunked in running water, muscles worked and then soothed under the bright open sky. And if you lean a bit closer, breathe in the honest scent of sweat rinsed away by a cold stream, you might find it more appealing than any gilded bottle of imported fragrance. So grin with me here, out in the field. Watch the farmer laugh, splash another handful of water over his neck, then shake it off in glittering droplets that catch the sun. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the simplest approach really was the sweetest. We'll wander on soon into even quirkier territory. Oddball medieval beauty hacks that would make your modern dermatologist run screaming for the hills. But for now, linger here. Let the clear air fill your chest. Let your own skin tingle with the memory of imaginary cool water. And enjoy this gentle little twist of fate, where the village lad with dirt under his nails might just be the freshest breeze in all the realm. So you've stood here a good long while, enjoying the honest breezes of the village lanes, maybe watching that broad-backed farmer whistle while he scrubs off under the well's dribble. But let's wander off the beaten path now, tiptoe past the hedgerow and duck into the shadow of a little wattle fence. Because hidden in these quieter corners of medieval daily life are some truly bizarre, oddly charming personal care secrets. Think of them like historical party tricks, tiny, surprising snapshots of how people long ago tried to keep themselves attractive, healthy, or just vaguely presentable by the standards of their day. Ready for a few? Lean close. I promise not to splash any pigeon blood on your boots. First up, dyeing your hair with pigeon blood. Yes, really. Picture this. A fashionable young lady seated on a low stool in her chamber. A wooden basin rests at her feet, a small hand mirror in her lap. Hovering nearby, her maid holds a bowl of something that looks suspiciously dark, thick, and well, metallic. It's a concoction made partly from pigeon blood, sometimes mixed with crushed herbs, ashes, or even rusty iron filings to help deepen the color. The idea was to give her hair a rich, dark sheen. Think sultry raven tresses that would catch the torchlight at a feast. The maid dips a cloth in the mixture and begins carefully applying it, strand by strand, trying to keep it from dripping onto the lady's embroidered sleeves. The scent is not pleasant. Coppery, slightly spoiled, undercut by the herbal notes that can't quite disguise the rawness. Meanwhile, our noble lady lifts the mirror, peers critically, and sighs with cautious delight, because tomorrow she'll glide into the great hall with her newly darkened locks, certain every head will turn. Would you try it? No, me neither. But it does make your own hair dye. Chemical odor and all seem downright spa-like by comparison, doesn't it? Foe. Next, soaking your feet in vinegar to cure the itch. Now, this one has a certain rustic logic to it. Vinegar is mildly acidic and can discourage some fungi, so it was used as a foot soak for all manner of medieval skin complaints. Everything from plain old tired toes to the less charming creeping itch of ringworm or athlete's foot. Picture a sturdy shoemaker at the end of the day. He's been standing for hours, hammering tiny iron nails into soles, bending over leather that smells sharp and tannic. Now he finally sits, pulls off his boots, wincing at the little crack in his heel, and lowers his feet into a bucket of cool water and vinegar. A sigh escapes him. It stings a bit. Sure, but that's proof it's working, right? At least by the standards of the local wise woman, who swears by it. A neighbor might wander by, raise an eyebrow, and ask, "Bit of pickling for your supper?" to which our shoemaker probably just grins. Because if it keeps the skin from splitting worse, or that rash from spreading, a little sour soak is a small price to pay. Would you let your feet fizz in a vinegar tub? Maybe after a long hike, though hopefully without the added medieval livestock ambiance. And finally, wrapping your chest in sheep wool to stay warm and ward off illness. This one's rather sweet, in a scratchy, slightly sheepish sort of way. Imagine a chilly morning in a modest farmhouse. Frost rims the tiny leaded window. A young mother sits by the hearth, pulling tufts of clean wool, just carded, still smelling faintly of lanolin, and open fields around her shoulders and chest. She binds it in place with strips of soft cloth, then layers her usual linen chemise over the top. The wool acts like an extra living blanket. It traps her body heat, keeps her lungs cozy, and according to plenty of local lore, helps ward off coughs or more sinister winter fevers. She might adjust it throughout the day, patting it into place with a fond little shrug. Maybe it's not quite elegant. Maybe she scratches at it more than she'd like. But it's simple, practical, and blessedly cheap. A peasant's personal defense system against medieval draftiness. You have to wonder, though, would you want sheep fluff tucked under your shirt all day? Warm? Sure, but a bit squirmy. No? I thought not. Now pause here with me. Imagine standing at the edge of this humble farmhouse, or by the smoky hearth of a manor chamber, or even tucked behind a market stall, where some eager vendor hawks tiny packets of dried herbs, promising to cure spots and sweeten breath. All these small, strange practices, bird blood rinses, vinegar soaks, woolly wraps, were medieval folks doing the best they could. In a world without microscopes or pharmaceutical labs, they leaned on what seemed logical, what felt good, what the village healer recommended with a knowing nod. And isn't that oddly endearing? Yes, it's funny. Yes, it's a little gross, but it's also deeply human. People then, like people now, wanted to be more comfortable in their bodies, wanted to smell nice, keep their skin healthy, avoid embarrassment, and maybe turn a few heads at the next feast. So if ever you're tempted to chuckle at the girl carefully smoothing pigeon blood through her hair, or the farmer plunging cracked heels into sour water, do it gently with a little warm grin. Because who knows, 500 years from now, someone might look back at your electric toothbrush or your bubblegum-flavored mouthwash and think, really? That was their idea of sophisticated self-care. Let your breath soften here. Let your shoulders drop, because we're done with today's little museum of medieval personal grooming oddities. Weren't they delightful in their own peculiar way? Tiny windows into lives that were trying, just like us, to feel a little fresher, a little prettier, a little less vulnerable to the thousand small indignities of being an animal housed in tender skin. And if you feel a gentle affection blooming in your chest for these distant strangers and their bizarre little habits, good. That's exactly the kind of sleepy human connection worth curling up around. We'll wander next into something a touch deeper, how cultures across time have decided what smells good or bad, and how even today we're probably just nose deep in our own peculiar blind spots. But for now, rest here. Let your mind replay these little vignettes. Pigeons, vinegar, sheep's wool, and know that for all their quirks, medieval folks were simply us in different tunics, hoping to stave off the same aches, spots, and chilly mornings. Isn't history tender when you tilt your head? Just so. So after all those playful tales, blood for beauty, vinegar for fungus, wool for winter chests. Maybe you're lying there under your blanket now, grinning into the dark, or wrinkling your nose a little. Because let's be fair, the idea of dunking your head in pigeon blood is vivid. But let your smile soften now. Close your eyes a moment, because we're going to drift somewhere quieter, somewhere not quite history, not quite philosophy, more like a gentle tide pool, where your thoughts can swirl around and settle in warm little eddies. Think for a second about smells, about what makes something smell clean to you. Is it that sharp fizz of lemon disinfectant, the airy cotton scent pumped out by your laundry dryer sheet, that sweet vanilla swirl from a candle promising soft linen daydreams? Or maybe it's the faintest ghost of shampoo on someone's pillow, the tiny puff of your own skin after you've spent an hour in the sun. Now imagine for a heartbeat that you're medieval, or Roman, or living in a thatched hut in Bronze Age Ireland. Your idea of clean might be smoke from oak logs, crackling under a cooking pot, curling through your hair, your tunic, your very pores. Or it might be the dry, grassy bite of last year's rushes strewn across your floor, or the acrid sweetness of new wool still whispering of sheep. You might lean into a hug with someone, breathe them in, and think, he's been in the fields today, fresh as crushed thyme and warm earth. No bottled pine breeze needed, because that's the quiet little truth. What we decide is pleasant or offensive, comforting or repulsive, is almost never universal. It's spun from threads of where we grew up, what our mothers washed our clothes with, how the air smelled outside our first classroom window, what food simmered on our grandmother's stove. It's culture, memory, habit, all tangled up like wildflowers in old fence wire. Picture for a moment a medieval nobleman reclining on a carved oak chair, lifting a lace handkerchief soaked in civet to his nose. Civet is a musky secretion from a little cat-like creature, faintly fecal, honestly, by modern reckoning. But in medieval Europe, it was the height of elegance, the very pinnacle of sophisticated scent. Nobility paid fortunes for it, dabbed it on their wrists, threaded it into candles that perfumed their great halls. If you or I wandered in, we might gag politely behind our hands, but he'd look at us in genuine confusion, thinking, what? This is the fragrance of power, of courtly allure. How can you not adore it? Or tilt your mind to the far future, hundreds of years from now. Imagine someone plucking your favorite hoodie off a dusty museum rack, lifting it to their face, and frowning. Strange. It all smells a bit like synthetic polymers, factory esters, something plasticky and bright. How could they stand that? Why didn't they prefer the rich, honest tang of sun-dried nettle cloth? They might even giggle at your signature deodorant, puzzled that you spent money to dab chemicals under your arms that reminded them of melted silicone. Because every time thinks itself the final authority on good and bad scents, when really each age is just cozy in its own little bubble, nose deep in its particular cocktail of memory and environment. Now come stand with me again on a medieval street. Breathe deep. What do you catch? A hint of ale sloshed out of barrels, already starting to go sour at the edges. Warm bread from the baker's open window, yeasty and a little burnt. Straw trodden underfoot, mingling with less polite droppings. Lavender bundles hanging from door lintels, fighting their bright herbal fight against the deeper must. Someone's linen fresh off the line, dried in open air, touched by smoke from 10 different chimneys, and yet clean by every measure they knew. It's a smellscape that would be almost unbearably vivid for your modern nose. Too raw, too direct. But if you lived there, your brain would make sense of it, sorting danger from comfort, finding sweetness in places that might surprise you. And it's not just about what's pleasant. It's about what feels safe, what feels like home. For medieval people, the heavy scent of rush-strewn floors, the tang of a hearth that burned peat or oak, the salty skin of someone who'd spent the afternoon hauling sacks of barley, those were anchoring, familiar, reassuring as your favorite blanket tucked under your chin right now. Just as your own nostrils might sigh happily at the sterile zap of hand sanitizer, a medieval nose might have felt oddly secure amid the soft reek of well-fed goats drifting through the courtyard, because it meant life was bustling, the household was thriving, the world was spinning on in its usual, slightly pungent way. Isn't it humbling, in a small and strangely cozy way, to realize that even your idea of clean is just a delicate little cultural trick, learned so early you forgot you ever learned it? A reminder that we're all creatures of our place and moment. Sniffing the air, nodding with satisfaction, not realizing someone half a world or half a millennium away might gag on it. Let your breath deepen here. Try it. Slow, warm, gentle through your nose. Imagine you're standing at the edge of that medieval field again, the grass tickling your ankles, a loaf of bread still warm under your arm. The air carries wood smoke, sun-baked earth, the breath of nearby cattle. You breathe it all in without flinching, because it's your world, your body's barometer for safety. It soothes you in ways you'd never need to question. Then blink, and you're back in your bed, your room smelling faintly of your laundry detergent, citrus or almond or something that exists only in modern chemistry labs. And isn't that funny? Your brain does the same little happy wag. Yes, home, safe. So maybe a few centuries from now, someone will lie in their futuristic bed, sniff the recycled oxygen in their habitat dome on Mars, and sigh with delight. Their friend might grin and say, "Ah, that perfect tang of aluminum panels and ionized air reminds me of childhood," and some ghostly echo of your medieval baker, your vinegar-footed shoemaker, your nobleman with civet-dabbed gloves will nod right along, understanding completely. Now let that thought curl gently around your ribs, because it's soft, isn't it? This idea that no matter how different our worlds smell, we're all just delicate mammals in love with what tells us, I belong here, I'm safe, this is mine, and it makes you a touch kinder toward the old woman who tucked lavender under her sheets, not just to repel fleas, but because it reminded her of spring, toward the noble who paid absurd sums for a drop of musky ambergris, trying to bottle some elusive promise of power, toward yourself for buying that overpriced candle that claims to smell like Pacific haze, even though you've never been near the Pacific, and honestly aren't quite sure what haze is supposed to smell like, because it's all the same gentle trick, a way to wrap ourselves in memory and comfort, a little nose-led magic that says, breathe easy, my friend, you're home, we'll wander soon, into letting all of this drift away, back to your own warm breath, your own heartbeat tucked under your blankets. But linger here with me just a moment more, savoring the idea that scent so private, so oddly profound, isn't fixed. It dances through time, changes clothes, winks at each new generation with different flowers pinned behind its ear. And that, truly, is what makes it so beautifully human. So after all this wandering through cold stone garter-robes and bustling bathhouses, through noble closets stuffed with lavender sachets and farm lads scrubbing down in chilly streams, maybe you're feeling a bit like you've lived several small lifetimes tonight. It's a lovely kind of weariness, isn't it? Like the soft ache in your legs after walking a little too far along a country road, only to look up and see the sun setting in melted gold. Pause with me now, right here, because we've followed the winding threads of so many other people's lives, imagining their soapy tubs, their sheeple chest wraps, even their nervous sidesteps around plague. And it's time to come back to your own small, tender present. Wherever you're resting now, take a second to really feel it. Notice how your body sinks just slightly deeper into the mattress or couch or favorite old chair. Feel how the fabric under your shoulders gathers up around you, making tiny hills and valleys that somehow always fit you perfectly, as though the cloth has memorized your shape. Let your head turn slowly, nestle a little closer into your pillow, and listen for a moment. Is there a faint hum? Maybe a fridge cycling in another room, or a car passing on the street below, or maybe just the gentle hush of air moving, almost too soft to notice unless you stretch your awareness toward it, like a cat lazily reaching out a paw. Breathe in. There's your familiar room smell. Maybe faint detergent. Maybe your shampoo still lingering on the pillowcase. Maybe even a ghost of the day's meals settled gently into the curtains. It's your own tiny, perfect sensory kingdom, one no medieval duke could have dreamed of, for all his tapestries and gilded pomanders. And then there's your breath. Oh, this is the simplest magic of all. Try it now, with me. Let a long, slow inhale draw deep into your ribs. Feel the stretch along your sides, a subtle nudge against your back where it meets the bed. Hold it just a moment, enough to notice the edges of your lungs, how expansive they feel. Then let it tumble out. Soft, easy, like a sigh that's been waiting all day to escape. Again, in slow and warm. Out, slower still, as if you're pouring yourself gently into the cushions. Do this a few times and marvel, because for all the centuries we've wandered through tonight, this tiny ritual is unchanged. A medieval farmer might have ended his day lying on a straw-stuffed sack, staring up at rough-hewn beams, breathing just like this. A castle maid, curling under woolen blankets after scrubbing floors, letting out a sigh that sounded exactly like yours. A young woman in a steamy bathhouse, leaning her head back against slippery wooden planks, eyes closing as her breath slowed into sleep. Isn't that tender? That this simple act, lungs rising and falling, binds us across time far more surely than any crown or tapestry. Let your shoulders drop now, just a fraction more. Sometimes we don't even realize how tightly we've been wearing them all day, like stiff armor. Let them slide down toward the mattress. Let your belly grow soft. Notice how your hands feel. Are they curled, tense from holding a phone, or fiddling with a blanket corner? Unfurl them. Let your palms open, heavy, relaxed. Even your jaw, does it cling to the day? Teeth faintly pressed together. Let it slack. Maybe your lips part just enough that a whisper of cool air drifts in. That's good. That's exactly right. Because all those stories we've chased tonight, the garter-robes that hovered above moats, The vinegar foot baths, the laughter that rang off bathhouse walls, those were wonderfully real, but they're also safely far away now. None of their drafts can reach you. None of their damp stone beds, their risky open pores, their anxious prayers against plague. You're here, wrapped up in a softness no medieval person could have fathomed. Clean sheets that smell faintly of cotton or vanilla or whatever modern magic your laundry soap promised. Your blankets are likely lighter than even their finest linen, yet warmer than their heaviest furs. And you can slip into this warmth without worrying if rats will skitter across the rushes, or if someone's chamber pot might drip through the ceiling beams. It's a small miracle we rarely pause to savor. So savor it now, because you've earned it just by being here, breathing alongside me. Isn't it funny how for all the centuries humans spent wrestling with filth and frost, with tangled ideas about what made them safe or lovely or whole, the deepest comforts are still the simplest. A clean space, a warm place, a gentle rhythm of breath that says, you're alive, you're safe, you can rest now. So let yourself drift here. Float in that cozy borderland where thoughts grow slow and syrupy, where the edge of each idea seems to melt a little before it reaches the next. You might find small flashes rising up, maybe the splash of a bathhouse tub, the playful shouts of children near a village well, the tender scratch of wool tucked around a tired chest. Let them flicker, then fade. Because right now, none of those belong to you. Your only job is to sink deeper into your pillow, to feel how your legs have grown pleasantly heavy, how your chest rises and falls all on its own. You've traveled far tonight, slipped through so many other lives. Now it's time to return, softly, lazily, to your own precious breath, your own waiting dreams. And if you listen closely, you might almost hear it, a kind of shared exhale echoing down through time, the sigh of a kitchen maid finally done for the night, the sigh of a farmer settling his weight into straw after chasing that stubborn goat, the sigh of a noblewoman leaning into a fresh pile of lavender-scented linen, hoping it's enough to keep her safe until morning. All of them, so different, yet so exactly like you. Creatures craving comfort, trying in their humble, fumbling ways to build tiny sanctuaries of warmth and peace. Let this be yours now, your sanctuary. Your breath, steady and slow, is more reliable than any castle wall. Your heartbeat, calm and even, is more precious than any jeweled ring or perfume sachet. So settle here. Let your thoughts grow blurred at the edges. Let the weight of the day slip off your shoulders and pool harmlessly on the floor where it can't trouble you anymore. Because this is your time to drift, to float, to slip deliciously toward sleep. And there's not a medieval draft or a single squealing bathhouse minstrel who can interrupt you here. We'll end this gentle voyage soon, with a few quiet thoughts to carry you the rest of the way into dream. But for now, breathe in again, slow, deep, tender. Hold it for a soft count, then let it sigh back out. You're safe. You're warm. And for tonight, that's more than enough. So here we are, you and I, hovering right at the tender threshold of sleep. Isn't it curious, after all we've explored tonight, latrines that emptied into moats, bustling bathhouses that doubled as low-key medieval dance clubs, noblemen dabbing civet on their wrists, while peasants scrubbed off in icy streams, what keeps drifting to the surface isn't disgust or scandal, but a kind of gentle, amused affection. Because if you look closely, there's something surprisingly romantic tucked under all that grime and awkwardness. Not romantic in the candlelit poetry sense. Romantic in the humble, beautifully human sense. Think of it this way. Every person we wandered past tonight, be they noble or shepherd, perfumed lady or sheep-wool wrapped grandmother, was fumbling toward the same thing. They all wanted to be comfortable, to keep the aches of the world from settling too deeply into their bones, to smell a little sweeter, perhaps, or at least not so sour that neighbors pinch their noses, to gather up a small, fragile scrap of safety, whether that meant extra linen shifts, a pomander dangling from the belt, or a quick rinse in a shivering stream. They didn't always get it right. Honestly, they often got it hilariously wrong. They rubbed pigeon blood into their hair because someone said it would look glossy. They skipped baths during plague years because they feared warm water opened doorways in the skin. They doused themselves in musky civet that might make your modern nose stage a tiny rebellion. But under every awkward attempt was the same sweet longing that pulses in you right now, a hope to feel safe in their skin, to ease the creak in their shoulders, to hold off the night's sharper chill, to maybe smell nice enough that someone would lean in closer, not step away. Isn't that a little bit wonderful? Because it means that for all the centuries stacked between us, for all the weird cures and stranger customs, people were always using whatever tools they had to soften the edges of being alive. Maybe they bundled up in scratchy wool, or soaked their feet in sour vinegar, or layered sachets until their linen chests practically swooned under the weight of cloves. You, on the other hand, have plush quilts, sweet almond lotion, your favorite worn-in t-shirt that somehow fits better than anything else. But at heart, it's the same earnest project, trying to be a little more at ease in this tender, troublesome body. And when you pull back even further, float above all these centuries, like a quiet ghost hovering over rooftops, you see something else glimmering at the core, a profound, shared vulnerability. Because whether it was a castle lord trying to keep fleas from nesting in his ermine trim, or a village girl nervously applying rosemary to her underarms before market day, every single one of them was basically whispering the same soft plea into the universe. Please, let me be okay. Let the world be gentle today. Let me be loved, or at least let me get by without shame. And isn't that your secret wish too, in the hushed dark of night? Isn't it everyone's? From medieval minstrels to modern office clerks, from pigeon-blood ladies to you there with your favorite pillow tucked under your chin. So maybe that's the quiet marvel to carry off into your dreams tonight. And no matter the era, no matter the odd little rituals or questionable scented choices, people have always been united by the same delicate needs. To be warm when it's cold. To be clean, or at least cleaner than yesterday. To ease a rashy foot, or a worried, churned belly. To smell something lovely, and believe, even for a heartbeat, that life could be just as sweet. And under all that, to be held by someone's arms, by the soft embrace of a good blanket, by the hush of a room where for a few blessed hours nothing will demand more than a sigh. So snuggle deeper now wherever you are. Feel your own chest lift and fall in that old, trustworthy rhythm that links you to every ancestor we've tiptoed past tonight. Notice how your feet have grown heavy, how your hands have gone slack and warm against the sheets. You're safe. You're warm. And most beautifully of all, your small, earnest attempts to make life gentler are part of an unbroken chain of gentle human fumbling that stretches back through every drafty castle, every smoky hearth, every moss-lined cottage door. It's strangely poetic, isn't it? We so often think history is only about kings and battles, dates memorized with a wince. But maybe the truest heart of history lies right here, in people dabbing perfumes, dunking toes, rearranging blankets, chasing comfort wherever they could find it. And maybe it means that for all our modern cleverness, our sleek soaps, our digitally controlled mattresses, our humidity-calibrated bedroom fans, we're still engaged in the same tender struggle, trying to make this life a little kinder on the skin, a little softer on the soul. So breathe it in, that soft wisdom, that winking, humble truth that ties your cotton pillowcase to medieval lavender sachets, your hot showers to a barrel bath under flickering candlelight. All of it is just humanity reaching for small sweetnesses in a world that can sometimes be rough. And if that's not the most quietly romantic thing you've ever heard, I don't know what is. Let your mind drift over it one last time. The noble with his civet pomander, the farmer wiping sweat with cool mint water, the young girl humming as she tucks a sachet of rosemary under her chemise, hoping it'll keep her safe and sweet-smelling through another long day. All of them, so far away, and yet so exactly like you. In a minute, we'll slip into a final little goodnight, a gentle whisper to seal up all these stories and let you drift wherever your dreams choose. But for now, hold this thought close to your chest, like a warm stone picked up from a sunlit path. No matter the century, no matter how odd the rituals, people are always just trying to take care of themselves the best they can. And that, in its clumsy, fragrant, sometimes pigeon blood way, is strangely, wonderfully, gloriously romantic. So let your breath deepen. Let your muscles soften. Let the quiet humor of all our shared, hopeful fumbling lull you toward sleep. Because tonight, you're just one more sweet creature in a very long, slightly ridiculous, utterly lovable line of humans trying to make life feel safe, soft, and maybe, if you're lucky, just a little bit like a tender miracle. So here we are, dear heart, at the soft, crinkled edge of tonight's long, winding story. We've wandered together through shadowed castle passages, paused to watch candles dance on bathhouse walls, giggled a bit at sheepwool chest wraps and pigeon-blood dyes. We've pressed our noses into musty medieval wardrobes, drifted by village wells, even shared a conspiratorial smile over peasants who might have been, in their sweetly rough way, cleaner than dukes. And all through it, your breath has been keeping you company, in and out, rising like a quiet tide, falling back again, as dependable as moonlight slipping across your pillow. Now, let everything grow slower. Let even your thoughts feel like they're wearing soft wool slippers, tiptoeing around so they don't wake you fully. Maybe, if you're still awake enough to notice, you feel the edges of the day blurring. Little images from our journey, warm barrels of water, rushes underfoot, the lazy stretch of a farm dog flutter by your mind's eye like slow, drowsy moths. Let them. No need to hold on to any of it too tightly. It's all meant to float, to drift, to slip away the way footprints vanish behind you on a damp woodland path. Now listen, just a bit closer, past even my voice. See if you can catch the hush of your own small world settling down. Maybe the faint sigh of pipes in the wall. Maybe a car far off. humming a lullaby only machines know. Maybe just the delicate sheet of fabric as you shift and pull your blanket closer. All these tiny noises telling you that nothing is expected of you now. No task, no cleverness, no need to stay alert. Just this, the slow bloom of your breath, the tender weight of your own body, loved by the bed that cradles it. So rest here. Let your eyelids flutter. Let your thoughts swirl in lazy circles, slower each time, like a feather twirling down through warm air. And know, truly know, in your chest where all the honest feelings live, that across centuries, across every curious little hygiene ritual and hopeful sachet, people were always reaching for the same hush that you hold now. A place to be still, to be safe, to simply be. And so, my friend, as your breathing grows gentler, as your hands grow lazier where they rest, you might already be half floating somewhere else, drifting in a place that feels part castle corridor, part sunlit hayfield, part warm, familiar bed. That's all right. Let the borders soften, let it blur, because you've earned this quiet. You've traveled so many centuries tonight without ever leaving your pillow. You've walked alongside nobles with scented gloves, peasants with bright cheeks scrubbed by stream water, sturdy men who trudged through castle drains so no one else would have to. You've stood in cool garter robes, whispering secrets down dark shafts, lingered by village wells, where laughter spilled out as easily as buckets of water. And now, you're right here, exactly where you belong, wrapped up in sheets that sigh around you, breathing air that knows your scent so well it could find you in a crowd. There's no moat to worry over, no draft creeping at your ankles, no wary glance for fleas or fevers. Only this hush, only this gentle pulse of your own heart, steady and soft, a drumbeat older than any kingdom. So close your eyes, fully now. Draw one last, deeper breath, slow, sweet, almost syrupy. And as you let it pour back out, imagine it carrying away every small leftover worry from the day. Feel your chest fall, your shoulders sigh, then do it again, even slower, letting the exhale spill out until there's simply nothing left but warm stillness. Good night, dear dreamer. May you drift now, where old stone walls crumble into soft moss, where village gardens spill over with bright, impossible blooms, where every breath is safe and every sleep is sweet. Rest well, sleep deep, and let morning find you with a smile.